The morning of June 21st, 2016 was scorching, just like most summer days in Riverside County, California. A local motorcyclist was riding along a rural road near Lake Mathews when he pulled off the highway and noticed a motionless figure on the shoulder. A man was lying on his back. His face was partially disfigured, and his clothes were soaked in blood. The nature of the injuries pointed to a violent crime, several stab wounds followed by a shot to the head. There were no signs of a struggle at the scene, nor any indication that the crime had occurred there. Everything suggested that the body had been transported and dumped after the crime. Investigators later identified the victim as 25-year-old Justin Hilbert, a resident of Riverside. On the evening of June 20th, he left the home he shared with his partner, Tanya Rep, and never returned. Their son was just 6 months old at the time. Justin had recently finished a technical training program and had just started a new job. His life seemed to be turning around, but it came to an abrupt end. The investigation immediately hit roadblocks. Justin had no known enemies, no debts, and those close to him reported no ongoing conflicts. Tanya Rep was born in California in the mid-1980s. She grew up in a stable, working-class household, became independent early, from a young age. She demonstrated responsibility and strong ambition. She worked in logistics, was known for her organizational skills, reliability. In the 2000s, Tanya met Jared Bischoff. He appeared mature, dependable, and strong. Their relationship progressed quickly. They married not long after. However, their marriage began to crack under pressure. Tension and power struggles grew more frequent over time. Jared became increasingly controlling and aggressive. He displayed jealousy, exerted emotional pressure, eventually resorted to physical force. Tanya refused to accept that behavior. She began gathering evidence, preparing for a divorce. The process was long and painful. Jared refused to let go, resisted the separation. He tried to maintain influence over her at any cost. Jared served in the U.S. Marine Corps. After leaving the military, he returned to California and struggled to find stable work. He had a determined, persistent character. Outwardly, he seemed calm and dependable, but beneath that facade, there was volatility and a desire for control. He viewed the marriage not simply as a personal relationship, but as his territory, one he would not allow interference in. After the divorce, he couldn't accept that Tanya had moved on. He especially struggled when she began seeing another man. Though he claimed to have come to terms with it verbally, he continued to interfere. He showed up near her home, monitored her activities, applied pressure, and issued threats. He didn't see his behavior as stalking. In his mind, it was about restoring justice and trying to regain lost control. Justin Hilbert lived in Riverside, California. He was just beginning to build his adult life. After years of side gigs and searching, he enrolled in a technical school, graduated, and landed a full-time job maintaining industrial equipment. Justin was calm, avoided conflict. In early 2015, he met Tanya. At the time, she was finalizing the end of a difficult marriage. Their first conversations felt easy, natural. Justin didn't push, didn't rush things, and never made demands. He simply showed up, listened, offered support, and helped when needed. Over time, Tanya and Justin developed a strong bond. They didn't move in together immediately, but they started to spend more time as a couple. With Justin, Tanya felt a sense of safety she hadn't experienced in a long time. When she discovered she was pregnant, Justin responded with calm and support instead of fear. He became more engaged, helping to prepare for the baby. And by early 2016, they were living together. In January, their son was born. He quickly became the focal point of their lives. Justin embraced fatherhood, learning how to swaddle, bottle feed, care for him at night, and take him for walks. Although they weren't legally married, their family and friends saw them as a complete family unit. Justin's parents welcomed Tanya into their lives, and she often spent time with them, creating a warm home environment. Justin had no ties to Jared and was unaware of how deeply Jared was affected by the changes in Tanya's life. All Justin wanted was to create a stable, loving family together. Bailey Sharp, the youngest person in this story, was born in the early 1990s in Seattle to a family involved in law enforcement. As a child, she was energetic, enjoyed science and sports. However, her life took a turn during her teenage years when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and lupus. The chronic pain and medical limitations significantly impacted her mental health. By the age of 16 or 17, she began using marijuana, progressed to prescription painkillers, and eventually sought out stronger drugs. Despite going through rehabilitation multiple times and experiencing periods of recovery, she faced ongoing relapses. By 2015, her social connections in Seattle had weakened, and her family relationships were strained, prompting her to move to California in search of a fresh start. In California, she struggled with unstable housing and unemployment. She would sometimes stay with acquaintances, frequent bars, and visit low-budget venues. It was at one of these places that she met Jared Bischoff, Tanya's ex-husband. Jared soon became a controlling figure in her life, using her vulnerability and dependence for his own gain, rather than seeking a romantic relationship. On June 20, 2016, the day in Riverside began like any other. Justin was spending time with Tanya and their 6-month-old son. They talked about Justin's early shifts at his new job and made plans for the week. Everything felt peaceful. In the afternoon, Tanya mentioned a strange conversation she had the night before. A woman named Bailey had sent her a message, alleging that Justin was being dishonest and living a double life. Tanya showed the messages to Justin, who read them carefully and firmly stated that they were false. He remained calm and suggested that someone was trying to create tension between them. Justin assured Tanya that he would find out who was behind the messages. He understood why she might doubt him and reassured her of his love and honesty. At around 9 p.m., Justin mentioned that he needed to step out for a little while. He didn't provide many details, but it was typical for him to briefly leave to grab tools, visit a friend, or get some fresh air. He prepared to go without any fuss, kissed his son, told Tanya he would be back soon, and left with his keys. Everything seemed normal at the time. However, hours went by and Justin did not return. Tanya tried texting him and then called, but there was no response. By midnight, his phone was turned off. Worry began to creep in. She stayed up, repeatedly checking messages and calling, hoping to hear from him, but there was silence. Justin had never spent the night away without informing her. At around 8 a.m. on June 21st, Tanya received a short text from Justin's number that simply said, "Don't wait, it's over." There was no greeting and no explanation. The message felt strange and uncharacteristic of Justin. Sensing that something serious had occurred, she quickly texted his mother and called his sister. Unfortunately, no one knew Justin's whereabouts. That morning, Riverside County authorities received a report about a man on a motorcycle who was riding down a rural road near Lake Mathews. He noticed a body lying face up, with clothes soaked in blood. There were no indications of a struggle. A medical examiner later confirmed that the victim died from a gunshot wound to the head, but there were also knife wounds that had occurred beforehand. All evidence pointed to the conclusion that the victim had been attacked elsewhere and then left in that location. The police identified the victim as Justin Hilbert. His earlier disappearance and a previous message now made a chilling connection. After discovering the body, investigators quickly began their work. The condition of the remains suggested that the crime likely occurred the previous night. Once they confirmed the victim's identity, officers visited the Justin home. Tanya stated that Justin left around 9 p.m. and had not returned since. The police recorded her statement and collected his possessions. They also noted that his dark blue sedan was missing and entered it into the National Database for Missing Vehicles. Upon examining Justin's clothing, they found that several personal items were absent. He usually carried his phone, work badge, and wallet, but none of these were found. It was evident that someone had intentionally tried to cover their tracks. Interviews with Justin's friends and colleagues provided minimal information. No one was aware of any problems or threats. Everyone characterized him as calm. There were no debts, lawsuits, or any clear motive. The case took a turn when investigators examined Tanya's recent messages. One name caught their attention: Bailey. She had reached out to Tanya just before Justin disappeared. A record search revealed Bailey Sharp, who is registered in San Bernardino County but does not have a permanent address. She is a young woman with a history of arrests related to banned substance. Bailey became the first major lead for investigators. There were no records of a job, insurance, lease, driver's license, or vehicle in her name. The only clue was the phone number she texted to Tanya. The police then examined the contacts associated with that number, identifying a man named Jared Bischoff, who is Tanya's ex-husband. There was no clear proof that Bailey and Jared were working together, but the circumstances were troubling. A woman with a questionable past suddenly contacting Tanya. That same phone number had also frequently reached out to Tanya's ex. Suspecting wrongdoing, investigators requested mobile device location data for the night of June 20th to 21st. Bailey's phone showed location pings in southern Riverside, near where Justin's body was eventually discovered. Investigators also examined Bailey's associates. Social workers reported spotting her with different men in parking lots and bars, but their identities were unknown. As a result, the investigators turned their attention to digital records. They found that the IP address used for Bailey's social media logins was the same as the one linked to Jared's account. This raised suspicions within the investigative team about a potential ongoing connection between Bailey and Jared. Although the exact nature of their relationship was unclear, to avoid raising suspicions among potential suspects, the investigators chose to carry out surveillance quietly and continue collecting information. They began by confirming the locations of the suspects and checking if they were together. There was still no direct evidence. Investigators initially overlooked another possibility until they analyzed the messages exchanged between Tanya and Bailey. They became increasingly convinced that these texts were part of a deliberate setup meant to instigate doubt, jealousy, and resentment in Tanya. Bailey suggested that Justin was living a double life, cheating, and portrayed herself as the true victim. However, the messages lacked concrete evidence and details. One notable aspect was the overly polished language. The texts sounded scripted rather than expressing genuine personal distress. This led to a new consideration. Either someone else had composed the messages, or Bailey was not acting independently. Cell phone records indicated that while texting, Bailey was connected to a public Wi-Fi network at a bar in Murrieta. Investigators promptly secured the bar's surveillance footage. The video showed a woman who looked like Bailey sitting in a back corner and using her phone. Beside her was a man who sometimes leaned in to speak with her, pointed at her screen, and then walked away. The poor video quality made it difficult to identify the man. Later, investigators uncovered an important fact. The message Tanya received on the morning of June 21st from Justin's phone was not actually sent by him. By that time, Justin was already dead, and his phone was with Bailey Sharp. This revelation was unsettling. Bailey had intentionally sent that message to create a false assurance, preventing Tanya from panicking and making it appear as if Justin had left willingly. The goal was to calm her down and delay her from contacting the authorities, which was part of a calculated plan to postpone the discovery of the crime and evade law enforcement. The suspects made a critical error by not recognizing how easily digital activity can be tracked today. The way messages were structured, the entry points to their network, and the movements of phones all indicated a coordinated plan. Bailey's actions raised further suspicion. Just one day after Justin went missing, she turned off her phone and disappeared. This didn't seem like a reaction of panic. It appeared to be premeditated. Once the police started searching for Bailey Sharp, they struggled to locate her. Her phone was off, and she wasn't sending any messages. The only clue they had came from surveillance footage from a pharmacy in Paris on the evening of June 22nd, about 24 hours after Justin's body was discovered. Bailey was seen on camera alone, wearing a medical mask and a hooded sweatshirt, purchasing pain relievers and bottled water. She used an ID that belonged to someone else. The clerk couldn't remember details, but the cameras recorded everything. After that, she vanished once more. She was declared a wanted person, and local law enforcement agencies were notified. Her photo, aliases, descriptions, and known connections were added to the system. Investigators concluded that if she were merely a witness, she would not be hiding. Her disappearance turned her into a suspect, but there was no concrete evidence linking her to the crime, and no one had presented clear testimony against her. The case relied on circumstantial evidence, coincidences, strange messages, and her unexpected disappearance. Police observed a recurring pattern. In recent weeks, Bailey had been spotted multiple times in Riverside, near a secluded residential complex. Surveillance cameras captured images of her vehicle, followed by footage of another car. It seemed improbable that she could go into hiding on her own. Someone was likely providing her with shelter or accompanying her. A bigger question arose. If Bailey was just the bait, who was truly behind this entire situation? Who orchestrated it all? The answer started to become clear on the morning of June 24th, when the Department of Motor Vehicles provided some information. The second vehicle that was often seen near Bailey was registered to Jared Bischoff. This name had already been mentioned in the case files. Jared is the ex-husband of Tanya, who lives with Justin. Until that point, the police had no reason to link him directly to Justin's disappearance, but now his vehicle had been spotted near the location where the main suspect was hiding. Investigators started looking into Jared's history. He was a former Marine with several years of service and had worked in warehouses, sometimes in private security. Over the past year, he had not maintained a steady job. After divorcing Tanya, he briefly lived with relatives before moving out. Friends of Tanya mentioned that communication between her and Jared had ceased following numerous arguments, controlling behavior, and emotional strain. She felt he was a threat to her safety. After their breakup, Jared became difficult to track down. No one knew where he was living or who he was with. Until Bailey Sharp came into the picture, phone data showed that Bailey had been visiting Riverside regularly for several weeks before the incident. Surveillance footage from that area showed her with a man who closely resembled Jared. This was later confirmed by location data from both Bailey's and Jared's phones, which indicated they were in the same places at the same times. On the night Justin went missing, both phones registered signals from the same area in Riverside where Justin's body was eventually found. Police obtained a warrant to search an apartment believed to be occupied by Jared. Based on his mobile activity, the lease was under a false name. Inside, the place was disorganized, containing leftover food, Bailey's clothing, a backpack, and a knife wrapped in a t-shirt. The knife tested positive for blood, which forensics later identified as belonging to Justin Hilbert. However, Jared was not found at the scene. Neighbors reported seeing him shortly before the incident, sometimes alone and other times with a woman who looked like Bailey. Afterward, both disappeared. Authorities in Riverside County have issued warrants for both suspects. The search now includes banks, phone companies, and traffic cameras. Investigators returned to a bar in Murrieta where Bailey was frequently seen. A bartender remembered her distinctly. She had been there with a tall, quiet man. At the time, he didn't know the man's name, but when shown a photo of Jared, he recognized him right away. The bartender noted that they appeared to be very cautious. They talk about the impending disappearance of a woman. This indicated that the initial target might have been Tanya. Justin's presence became the catalyst for the conflict. Jared, using Bailey, set up a scheme where she sent Tanya false messages suggesting infidelity. This was intended to sow doubt, incite conflict, and potentially push Justin away. On the evening of June 20th, Justin left his home after receiving text from Bailey, who claimed she wanted to meet and reveal information about the situation. Unbeknownst to Justin, he was heading into a trap. A few days later, investigators found Justin's abandoned car on a secluded road, far from any houses or security cameras. Inside the vehicle, there were bloodstains on the seat, and outside, a partial fingerprint belonging to Danny Serrano, a man with a criminal record for assault and theft. At that time, Danny was in custody for another charge, but it was confirmed that he was free when Justin went missing. Investigators interviewed Danny at the detention center. Although he denied being involved in the incident, his statements were inconsistent. The police had his photo and showed it to the bartender, who recognized Danny immediately. He remembered seeing Danny with another man who seemed nervous and agitated. Though Danny hadn't been drinking much, he changed clothes in the restroom and threw something in the trash as he left. His testimony supported investigators' suspicions that a third person was involved. Justin's phone was later found in a dumpster near where his car was discovered. Although the phone was damaged, forensic experts managed to retrieve the call logs and text messages. These records indicated that, in the hours leading up to his death, Justin received texts from Bailey's number, followed by a phone call that prompted him to leave his home. In early July, investigators took an interest in a small motel in Arizona where a man and woman matching the descriptions of Jared and Bailey had stayed. The motel manager remembered them as quiet guests who paid in cash and requested not to be disturbed. After their stay, the motel's shower had been thoroughly cleaned, but traces of blood were found in the drain. On July 23, 2016, near an abandoned hangar in the desert, the body of a woman was discovered. It was Bailey Sharp. She had died from multiple stab wounds, and no personal items, identification, or phone were found with her. Additionally, Jared's fingerprints were found on a plastic bag near the dump site where Bailey's body had been hidden. The police became increasingly convinced that Jared had removed a potential witness, making him the primary suspect in both cases. On July 27th, a diner in Arizona reported seeing a man resembling Jared who dined alone and paid with cash. Surveillance footage confirmed it was Jared. Then, on July 30th, in New Mexico, a patrol unit stopped a car with a broken taillight. The driver appeared nervous and possessed fake identification. Fingerprint analysis revealed that it was Jared Bischoff. He was arrested. The authorities found cash, forged documents, and a backpack with clothing in his possession. During questioning, he remained calm and chose not to speak, but the evidence against him was strong. Blood traces matching Bailey's were discovered in a motel, and a knife was found in the apartment. Forensic experts affirmed that the blood on the knife matched blood found in Justin's car, the scene of the crime. Additionally, Jared's DNA was detected on the steering wheel and driver's seat of the car, indicating he had driven it after the incident. Danny Serrano's confession during a second interview ultimately resolved the case. Worried about receiving a life sentence, he decided to cooperate with authorities. He disclosed that Jared was the one who used the knife and fired the fatal shot. Danny also admitted to helping restrain Justin and participating in disposing of the body. His account was consistent with both digital evidence and physical findings. Investigators gathered substantial digital evidence, including geolocation data, message history, and patterns of communication. Forensic linguists analyzed messages sent to Tanya from Bailey's phone number and determined they were actually written by a man. This confirmed prior findings. Jared and Bailey had worked together, with Jared being the mastermind and the one who directly committed the crime. In the spring of 2017, a trial started for Jared Bischoff. He was indicted on charges of first-degree murder in connection with the death of Justin Hilbert and Bailey Sharp, conspiracy, and evidence destruction. The jury found him guilty on all charges, and he received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. His lawyer chose not to appeal the verdict based on the evidence presented. Additionally, Danny Serrano was charged by the district attorney's office with aiding and abetting in a first-degree crime and obstruction of justice. His trial occurred in the fall of 2017, and he was also found guilty by the jury. During sentencing, the court took into account his substance abuse issues and his lesser role in the crime, resulting in a 25-year sentence without the possibility of parole for the first 20 years. One of Jared's former military colleagues revealed that, before the crime took place, Jared often expressed intense resentment towards Tanya. He believed she had destroyed his life, taken everything from him. He saw her as something he owned, and her new partner as a challenge to his authority. What happened to Justin wasn't merely revenge. It was Jared's attempt to emotionally damage Tanya. At first, Jared intended to go after both Justin and Tanya. However, Danny reported that he changed his plan. Jared supposedly said that causing physical death would be too easy and that true suffering would come from leaving someone alive. He thought that if she survived, she would endure ongoing pain for the rest of her life. Jared believed Tanya's greatest suffering would come from losing the person she loved, experiencing fear and isolation, and having to face her son every day. For this reason, Justin became the target. On Valentine's Day in Tijuana, Elizabeth was excited about a second date with a man she had recently met. As usual, she let her family know where she was going, even shared her location for safety. Initially, everything seemed fine. However, her messages suddenly stopped. Her phone went quiet, and her car was missing. By the next morning, her family began searching everywhere for her, hoping to find any clue. What they uncovered shattered their hearts and revealed a more disturbing situation in the city. Elizabeth was not alone. Her case was just the start of a troubling pattern. Elizabeth Martinez Figueroa was born in 1996 in Tijuana, Baja California, a city on the border between Mexico and the United States. She was the youngest of 7 siblings. People who knew her described Elizabeth as a cheerful and gentle young woman who had a strong bond with her mother. Her mother was more than just a mother to her. She was her anchor, confidant, and main source of strength. By early 2022, Elizabeth accomplished something her family had never achieved before. She graduated with a degree in international trade and business from a private university. This was a significant milestone, but it didn't satisfy her ambitions. She aspired to pursue a master's degree to create more opportunities for herself and her family. While planning her educational journey, Elizabeth also managed a small clothing business. To boost her income, she worked as a dancer in a bar located in Zona Norte, a popular nightlife area for both tourists and locals. Like many women in her situation, Elizabeth was careful. She kept her family updated, especially when meeting clients. She shared her location, maintained communication, and trusted her instincts. This cautious habit would later play a crucial role in the effort to track her last movements. On February 14, 2022, Valentine's Day, Elizabeth seemed excited. She had lunch with her mother that afternoon, which turned out to be their last meal together. Later that evening, she had a second date with a man she had recently met at work. He was American. Elizabeth confided in her brother, expressing that while she was uncertain about him, her curiosity led her to give him another chance. Staying true to her usual habits, she promised to keep in touch, send updates, and share her location. Some reports indicate they met again at a bar, while others suggest she picked him up near a border crossing in her white SUV. They went to a Brazilian restaurant for dinner and then drove to a motel close to the beaches of Tijuana. Elizabeth informed her family that she would be gone for no more than 4 hours. At the start of the night, everything appeared normal. She kept sending her location, and her messages reassured her family about her safety. They knew where she was and who she was with. However, then the updates suddenly stopped. There were no more messages, no answered calls, and no signs that she was moving. This silence was not just worrisome, it was overwhelming. Her family's anxiety grew rapidly. The lack of communication was completely out of character for someone as careful and responsible as Elizabeth. It quickly became a clear sign that something was seriously wrong. As the hours went by, the feeling of dread intensified, marking the onset of a nightmare that no one was ready to face. When hours went by without any news of Elizabeth, her family didn't hesitate to take action. That same night, filled with fear and uncertainty, they started searching for her on their own. Their first stop was the bar where she worked, but the response they received was shocking. Elizabeth had not come in that day. Her concerned co-workers provided the family with an important lead, a detailed description of the man she was supposed to meet. They described him as overweight, with light brown skin and visible acne scars. He was a frequent customer at the bar, and although he didn't have a name, the description was detailed enough to help the family in their search. By February 15th, the family was increasingly worried due to the lack of news about Elizabeth. They decided to report her disappearance to local authorities, but encountered a common hurdle: bureaucracy. They were informed that they had to wait 24 hours before they could file an official report. Determined not to delay, they took to social media, creating pages, sharing photos, and soliciting the public's help. Despite their efforts, it felt as though Elizabeth and her white Jeep Liberty had completely disappeared. On February 16th, authorities officially expanded the report to include her missing vehicle. GPS tracking of Elizabeth's phone showed her movements, first to a Brazilian restaurant near the river, then to a motel, and finally to a park. The last recorded location was a downtown hotel in Tijuana. Her brother hurried there, but hotel staff denied him entry, and there was still no sign of Elizabeth or her Jeep. On Thursday, February 17th, her family used the vehicle's GPS history to track it to a street in Zona Norte. A sense of dread settled over them. Something was definitely wrong. Elizabeth's mother and brother drove directly to the location. Although the Jeep was there, Elizabeth was not. They called the police, and officers and firefighters arrived within minutes to secure the area. Their attention quickly turned to the trunk of the vehicle. What they discovered confirmed the worst fears of Elizabeth's family. Her lifeless body was inside, naked and curled up in a fetal position, exhibiting clear signs of violence. The heartbreaking scene devastated her family, leaving them in shock and disbelief. Elizabeth's family spoke out about her murder, the silence and inaction that preceded it. They highlighted a system that failed to respond when she went missing and the long wait for justice. The story quickly gained attention and sparked outrage throughout the city. Friends, co-workers, even strangers gathered at the scene. Elizabeth's body was taken to the forensic medical service for a complete autopsy. The findings were troubling. She had multiple blunt force injuries on her face, chest, and abdomen. A deep mark on her neck indicated an attempted strangulation. Additionally, there were signs of asphyxiation due to blockage of both her mouth and nose. Forensic experts determined that asphyxiation was the most likely cause of death. The investigation did not provide any information on possible abuse assault. Nonetheless, the case is officially categorized as a femicide, and an investigation is underway to find her murderer. The tragedy continued for the family after Elizabeth's passing. Just 3 days later, her mother suffered a sudden heart attack and died. Although the official cause was cardiac failure, many believed it was due to overwhelming grief that her body could not bear. As the family laid both mother and daughter to rest, the investigation picked up speed. Local and state authorities began to connect Elizabeth's case with others in the area. A frightening realization surfaced. This was not an isolated incident. The method of killing shared unsettling similarities with 2 other cases of young women who also worked in nightlife scene in Zona Norte. Karen, a 28-year-old mother from Veracruz, went missing on August 30th, 2021 after meeting a man at a motel. 3 days later, her body was discovered in a local garbage dump, showing obvious signs of violence. Karen had recently started working as a dancer and escort. She was careful about her safety, only meeting clients through direct phone calls. Before she left that day, she informed both a friend and a relative about her plans. Despite their quick efforts to find her, the situation ended in tragedy. Security cameras recorded the vehicle used by the man she met, and a friend later identified him from the video. However, surprisingly, no arrest warrant was issued, and the man remained at large. Angela Carolina Acosta Flores was only 20 years old when she was found dead in a hotel room on January 24, 2022, near the bar where Elizabeth worked. Like Elizabeth and Karen, Angela had gone to meet a man described as American and possibly of Hispanic descent. Her phone was missing from the crime scene, and when investigators traced it, they found it had been taken to Riverside, California, across the border. This discovery alarmed the investigators. 3 women had been brutally murdered, all linked by time, location, and method. Each case involved a mysterious man, likely American, and all 3 women were associated with the nightlife in the same area. They were killed within a 6-month period, leading to a troubling conclusion. There may be a serial killer targeting vulnerable women in Zona Norte. On Wednesday, November 16, 2022, the Baja California State Prosecutor held a highly anticipated press conference. With a room full of reporters and the nation watching, he confirmed a troubling presence. A serial killer was active in Tijuana. The prosecutor revealed that the suspect specifically targeted exotic dancers and escort who belonged to one of the city's most at-risk groups. His method was alarming. He would travel from the United States into Mexico, commit his crimes, and then escape back across the border, making it difficult for authorities to catch him. At that time, no additional details were shared to avoid compromising the investigation or alerting the suspect. Meanwhile, the manhunt for the killer was intensifying. Nearly a month later, on December 13th, the prosecutor held a second press conference. This time, the news was shocking. They had identified a suspect, an American citizen, whose psychological profile resembled that of Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers from the 1970s. However, there was a complication. The man had already left Mexico. Although a local arrest warrant was issued, it wasn't sufficient. Authorities sought a red notice from Interpol to enhance international cooperation. The FBI and U.S. consulates joined the search, and the suspect's physical description was made public to help locate him. Experts also conducted new forensic tests to ensure that no accomplices were missed. The breakthrough in the investigation came from detailed profiling. Investigators identified the man's methods. He targeted young women who were petite, attractive, and vulnerable. He portrayed himself as polite, respectful, and generous to gain their trust and lower their defenses. Once he had their confidence, he would lure them to secluded areas where he would then attack them. Each of the three known victims, Elizabeth Martinez, Karen, and Angela Carolina Acosta Flores, suffered extreme violence, with visible injuries primarily to their faces and chests. His method of asphyxiation was a defining characteristic. Two of the victims were found without clothes, while the third, although still dressed, had more injuries, indicating she may have fought back. This was not a crime of passion. It was deliberate, predatory, and systematic. Although these three cases gained media attention, they were not isolated. At the time of Elizabeth's disappearance, there were already rumors about other missing women with similar ages, professions, and unfortunate outcomes. Their stories have quietly faded away without resolution. As the investigation progressed, authorities were under pressure to act quickly. Although the suspect's identity remained confidential, local media labeled him as the Ted Bundy of Tijuana. His actual name was Bryant Rivera, a U.S. citizen with several known addresses in Southern California. Authorities searched these locations, but he was nowhere to be found. Family members described Bryant as working in e-commerce. Meanwhile, the Elizabeth's family was actively seeking justice for her. On February 14, 2023, marking 1 year since her murder, they revisited the site where her body was discovered and placed a floral tribute in the shape of a heart. Her brother spoke to reporters, expressing his deep sorrow and anger. A year had passed, and Bryant remained at large. The family's lawyer had been denied access to the case details, and the prosecutor's office had not provided any updates. Additionally, Elizabeth's Jeep Liberty, which was part of the crime scene, had yet to be returned. On July 6, 2023, Bryant was arrested in Los Angeles. The arrest took place calmly at his parents' home. However, he was only charged with the murder of Angela Carolina, while the murders of Karen and Elizabeth were not included in the U.S. charges, even though Mexico had made an active extradition request for all three cases. The Baja California prosecutor publicly confirmed Bryant's arrest, stating it was a result of collaboration between local and federal law enforcement agencies in the U.S. Bryant was assigned a public defender and requested bail. The judge denied the bail request, citing concerns about Bryant being a flight risk and a potential danger to women. He was ordered to remain in custody at Los Angeles County Jail. His family firmly rejected all allegations against him. His mother claimed he could never commit such acts of violence, and his sister even wrote a letter to support his character. However, the evidence suggested otherwise. On June 29, 2023, a federal judge in Los Angeles approved Mexico's request to extradite him. Family members of Angela were present at the hearing, along with the brother of Elizabeth. The courtroom was heavy with the sorrow of three grieving families. The judge emphasized that Bryant would remain in custody. As of June 2025, the extradition process is still ongoing. Legal experts estimate it could take up to 2 years to complete. If convicted of all three murders, Bryant could potentially face a total of 180 years in prison. However, due to Mexican law, the maximum sentence he could actually serve is 50 years. In addition, Mexican prosecutors have suggested that Bryant might be connected to a fourth victim, prompting them to investigate unsolved cases of missing women. Investigators are also re-examining surveillance footage from hotels and motels to determine if this predator has been active for a longer period than initially suspected. The situation surrounding Elizabeth has evolved from a personal tragedy to a representation of a larger national issue. Her death, along with the deaths of Karen and Angela, underscores the serious stigma and disregard that women in the escort industry encounter. When Elizabeth went missing, authorities did not intervene. Instead, it was her family who located her. It was her online activity, rather than official procedures, that ultimately pointed to her killer. Even now, despite an arrest, justice has not been achieved. The murder of Elizabeth Martinez Figueroa is a heartbreaking reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by women in Tijuana's nightlife and the devastating consequences of a system that too often fails them. Her vibrant spirit, her dreams of a brighter future, and her deep bond with her family were cruelly extinguished, leaving a void that echoes through her community. The cases of Elizabeth, Karen, and Angela reveal a chilling pattern of violence that demands urgent action. As Bryant Rivera's extradition process drags on, Elizabeth's family and countless others continue their relentless pursuit of justice, refusing to let her story fade into silence. This tragedy is not just a personal loss, but a rallying cry to confront the stigma, neglect, and impunity that perpetuate such crimes. It began as an ordinary morning in Brisbane. Hannah Clark was getting her 3 kids into the car for their school run when everything took a sudden turn. A man washing his car heard Hannah's urgent cries, and a passing driver saw her engulfed in flames as she tried to escape. He quickly came over with a fire extinguisher, but was shocked to witness the car explode. What was happening? This was no accident. It was something much more sinister, and the frightening reality had been developing over several years. Hannah Clark was born on September 8, 1988 in Brisbane, Australia, to her loving parents, Sue and Lloyd. From a young age, she was known for her cheerful, outgoing personality. Hannah had a special talent for making people smile and always dreamed of becoming a mother. She had a close relationship with her younger brother, taking on the protective role typical of an older sister. As an athlete, Hannah excelled in trampoline gymnastics and represented her state at just 16 years old. In her final year of school, she showcased her leadership skills by being selected as school captain, a role meant for students who set a positive example for others. After graduating, she followed her passion for working with children by teaching youth gymnastics at the Police Citizens Youth Club. At her workplace, Hannah met Rowan Baxter, who would eventually have a significant impact on her life. Rowan was born in 1977 in New Zealand and experienced a challenging childhood characterized by instability. His father was imprisoned when he was young, which greatly affected his early years. Family members described Rowan as an unpredictable child with disturbing tendencies toward cruelty. Despite these difficulties, Rowan pursued a career in sports. He played rugby at Tangaroa College before signing a contract with the New Zealand Warriors team in 2005. Although he was officially part of the team, he never actually played in a game and earned a modest salary of $10,000 per year. Nevertheless, he often referred to himself as a former professional rugby player, using this label to enhance his reputation, both personally and professionally. People who knew Rowan personally described him as highly competitive, controlling, and prone to anger. He had a strong desire to dominate those around him and could not handle rejection. Before meeting Hannah, Rowan had been married and had a son from that marriage. He married at 18 while his wife was only 16. By the time their son was 2 years old, Rowan's controlling behavior had become too much for his wife. She wanted to leave him, but he refused and resorted to stalking, making threats. In a frightening incident, he told her he had thought about harming himself and their child. Feeling trapped, she decided to stay in the marriage despite her fears. In 2008, while Hannah was teaching gymnastics, Rowan's son was in her class, which is how they first met. At that time, Rowan was still married but pursued Hannah, claiming his marriage was already over and that he was only living with his wife for the sake of their son. A few months after starting their affair, Rowan ended his marriage and moved out, agreeing to co-parent his child. Despite this, he continued to exhibit aggressive behavior, threatening his ex-wife during disagreements about parenting. In October 2012, Hannah and Rowan got married while she was 14 weeks pregnant with their first child. Soon after their wedding, Rowan stopped paying child support for his son from his previous marriage. On April 10, 2013, their daughter Aaliyah was born. She was a smart child who loved reading and had a strong sense of right and wrong. Even at a young age, Aaliyah noticed how her father treated her mother and wasn't afraid to confront him about it. In January 2015, Hannah and Rowan, both enthusiastic about fitness, opened a gym. Although Hannah's parents and another investor provided the funding, the business eventually faced financial difficulties. In March 2015, their second daughter, Liana, was born. She had a gentle personality and often helped keep the peace in the family. Liana would try to comfort their father when he got angry. Their third and youngest child, Trey, was born on December 4, 2016, a devoted mama's boy. Trey loved to run and play, but he was happiest when he was with his mother. Over the years, Rowan became more controlling and aggressive. His possessiveness towards Hannah grew. He restricted her independence by insisting they share a Facebook account, leaving her without her own. Gradually, he isolated her from her close-knit family, limiting her interactions with them. His controlling behavior also affected their children. If they didn't clean up quickly enough, he would throw away their toys. He even canceled fun activities to punish Hannah and their children. After an argument, Rowan took the children and left the house. Feeling upset, Hannah called her mother to talk about it. Later, Rowan confronted Hannah and repeated their entire conversation verbatim. When Hannah asked how he knew what she said, Rowan casually mentioned that he had accidentally left his phone recording. Rowan exerted control over Hannah in their intimate relationship, insisting she comply with his demands every day. If she pushed back, he would instigate arguments, making her life extremely difficult. In a particularly frightening moment, he broke her watch in a fit of anger and left the house, worried he might harm himself. Hannah called her mother in panic, fearing for his safety. Her parents drove around Brisbane looking for him. When Rowan eventually returned home, he told her that he had gone to a church parking lot and almost attempted to end his own life. By November 2019, Hannah felt overwhelmed and knew she needed to leave her situation. She reached out to a family violence resource center for help, sharing her fears about how to safely escape from Rowan. Concerned he was keeping tabs on her, she collaborated with the center to develop a temporary escape plan. This plan was set in motion in December 2019. Hannah took only the essentials and, after picking up Aaliyah from school, went directly to her best friend's house to protect herself. She left her phone in her car, suspecting that Rowan was tracking her movements. The following day, she moved to her parents' home for safety. On December 4th, Rowan contacted Relationships Australia, which helps families and individuals in crisis. They offered him a counseling session on December 10th, but he did not confirm or attend. On December 14th, 10 days later, he saw his doctor, revealed that Hannah had left him and taken the children. He talked about his control issues and became emotional, expressing regret for his past actions. He returned for a mental health consultation on December 16th and received a prescription for medication commonly used to treat insomnia. Meanwhile, Hannah decided to seek legal protection. On December 6th, she went to the police and was advised to get a domestic violence order against Rowan. However, she was hesitant, fearing that legal action might worsen his behavior. Despite her concerns, Hannah kept in contact with Rowan, hoping he would stay involved with their children. He frequently manipulated her, urging her to consider the kids and suggesting that leaving him would hurt them. Additionally, he started telling Hannah's parents that she was mentally unstable and falsely claimed that he was innocent of any wrongdoing. This resulted in a tiring cycle of conflict. His harassment intensified, similar to what she had experienced in his previous marriage. He started appearing uninvited, entering her parents' home without permission, and following her. On December 26, 2019, Rowan was supposed to return the children after spending the day with them. However, when Hannah came to pick them up, he forcefully placed Liana in the front seat of his car and drove away quickly. Later that evening, he called Hannah on FaceTime and made a demand. If she did not end an alleged affair, he would not return Liana. Frustrated, Hannah reached out to her lawyer, who wrote a formal letter demanding the return of Liana. As the situation escalated, the police decided to take action and issued a domestic violence order on Hannah's behalf, even though she wasn't ready to file one herself. The officers found Rowan at his home. They informed him of the court order that required him to stay at least 300 feet away from Hannah and the children until a hearing could decide the permanent arrangements. The police then took Liana into custody and brought her back to Hannah. Rowan was barred from contacting them until January 4, 2020, when they were all scheduled to appear in court. During a welfare check, officers observed that Liana seemed scared. Since her abduction, she experienced intense separation anxiety, feeling the need to always see her mother. Authorities suggested that Hannah seek specialist child psychology services for the children, but she did not follow through on this after the police intervention. In conversation with authorities, Hannah gave a detailed account of the abuse she suffered. She revealed that Rowan forced her to sleep with him every night while belittling her. He insulted her by saying she was disgusting and compared being intimate with her to intimate with a bucket. Hannah also expressed her long-standing fear for her own life and her children's safety. Rowan had chillingly detailed a plan to kill his ex-wife, their son, and himself, which made Hannah genuinely afraid he would attempt something similar with her and their children. Rowan's troubling behavior on social media became increasingly evident. In several videos he shared, he interacted with the children in a dangerously rough manner, occasionally displaying violent actions. One alarming video showed him forcing the children into an ice bath while little Trey cried uncontrollably. Despite this disturbing evidence, Rowan attempted to control the story. Just as Hannah submitted her statement, he reached out to the police, claiming he was afraid of her. On December 29, 2019, Rowan participated in his first counseling session for mental health treatment. During this session, he confessed to having issues with jealousy and recognized that Hannah had left him because of his controlling behavior. However, there was no comprehensive evaluation for potential family violence risks. The session mainly covered basic coping techniques, like breathing exercises, without addressing the seriousness of his situation. His mental health evaluation indicated that he was dealing with moderate depression and anxiety, but he denied any thoughts of self-harm or harming others. On December 31st, Rowan attended another counseling session and revealed that a protection order had been issued against him. He claimed that Hannah had made false accusations and was deeply upset about being unable to see his children. Notes from that session show that he and the counselor talked about the emotional stress of being away from his kids. Rowan continued to attend counseling, returning on January 6th. During this session, he expressed a desire for joint custody of the children, even as tensions rose. Again, no risk assessment was conducted, and the session focused solely on strategies to help Rowan cope, such as trying new activities. On January 8th, their case was heard in court. Rowan challenged the domestic violence order, but the judge ruled in favor of Hannah. The court decided that Rowan was prohibited from committing any acts of family violence, putting the children at risk, coming within 300 feet of Hannah's home, or contacting her for any reason unrelated to the children. Despite this, Rowan sought help from a men's legal service. On January 17th, he expressed his concern that Hannah intended to take the children and leave, removing him from their lives permanently. Around the same time, his behavior raised alarms. He began appearing at the same coffee shops and shopping centers as Hannah, seemingly by chance, but it happened too frequently to be coincidental. Hannah started to suspect that he might have placed a tracking device on her vehicle. During the January 21st session, he claimed that he was being unfairly labeled as mentally unstable to restrict his access to his children. Determined to contest the domestic violence order, Rowan's lawyer submitted a letter to the court, arguing that Hannah sought the order solely to regain custody of their children. On January 23rd, the court made a final decision on custody, granting Hannah full custody while allowing Rowan to spend alternating weekends with the children and scheduled FaceTime calls. All exchanges of the children would occur at Hannah's parents' home. The court's decision did not lessen the children's distress. They often showed hesitance about visiting their father, especially Aaliyah. During one visit, Aaliyah called Hannah in tears, saying they were being driven somewhere, but she didn't know where. On January 31st, Rowan returned Trey later than expected. As Hannah took her son out of the car, she noticed explicit photos of herself lying in plain sight. Shocked, she grabbed the photos and turned to go inside. But Rowan suddenly got out of the car and twisted her wrist behind her back. Alarmed, Hannah's mother quickly called the police. Rowan denied any wrongdoing. A doctor later confirmed that Hannah had a sprained wrist and put it in a splint. Hannah reported the incident and the breach of the domestic violence order to the police. But when officers tried to question Rowan, he refused to answer without a lawyer present. Rowan's life was falling apart. He lost his job as a personal trainer at a local gym, and Hannah's lawyers notified his legal team that she would not be adhering to the parenting agreement anymore. As a result, Rowan would no longer have access to the children. Overwhelmed by anger, Rowan viewed himself as the victim. Although he violated the domestic violence order, the police did not arrest him right away. They instead gave him a notice to appear in court. He was also charged with common assault for injuring Hannah's wrist. On February 17, Rowan went to a hardware store where he bought zip ties, a jerry can, and denatured alcohol. The following day, he filled the jerry can with 5 liters of gasoline. During his shopping trip, he also purchased 3 Kinder Surprise eggs and some lollipops. On February 18th at 3:28 p.m., he called Youth and Family Services to ask about a men's support program. 30 minutes later, he contacted a men's helpline with the same inquiry. Later that evening, at 6:25 p.m., he called a friend, crying and claiming he couldn't see his children during a scheduled FaceTime call. During this time, Hannah sensed that something was seriously wrong. She confided in her mother about needing to write a will, fearing that if Rowan harmed her, he would end up in prison and someone would have to care for the children. She also shared her concerns with a friend at the gym, expressing that she believed Rowan might hurt the kids or even herself. Unfortunately, her worst fears would soon come true. On the morning of February 19th, 2020, Hannah and her mother followed their usual routine by going to the gym. After their workout, Hannah returned home at 6:20 a.m. and went out again to buy coffee for herself and her mother. She sat on her mother's bed, enjoying her drink while her mother got ready for work, with the children nearby. At 7:20 a.m., Sue kissed her daughter and grandchildren goodbye, not knowing it would be the last time she would see them. Hannah then loaded her 3 children into the car to take Aaliyah and Liana to school. Trey was safely strapped in the middle seat, while Liana sat in the passenger side rear seat. Just as Hannah started the engine, Rowan jumped into the passenger seat holding a jerry can filled with gasoline and demanded that she drive. In a panic, Hannah screamed at him to get out of the car. She drove a short distance and stopped next to a man, Michael Zemek, who was washing his car, desperately calling for help. "Call the police. He's going to kill me. He's poured petrol on me." Michael turned and saw Rowan holding Hannah down, preventing her from escaping. Despite her struggles, Rowan remained eerily calm and in control. In a sudden moment of determination, Hannah broke free and scrambled out of the car. But by then, Rowan had already set everything on fire. Flames quickly engulfed her. Michael quickly sprang into action upon seeing Hannah surrounded by flames. He shouted for her to roll on the ground while he grabbed a hose to put out the fire. Once Hannah was safe and no longer burning, Michael focused on Rowan, extinguishing the flames on his body. The huge fire made Michael unaware of the presence of the children in the car. As the shock of the situation set in, Hannah screamed about her children, realizing her urgency. Michael rushed into his house to call emergency services. By the time he returned, another bystander, Samantha Covey, had arrived. She had been driving when she saw the thick black smoke and flames. Samantha picked up the hose and continued to try to douse the fire. She stayed with Hannah, comforting her as they awaited help. Meanwhile, Hannah, in great pain, kept asking about her children. Nearby, another neighbor, Carrie Fernandez, heard Hannah's cries for help. As soon as she saw the burning vehicle, she called emergency services and stayed on the line with dispatchers. While she spoke, the car suddenly erupted into a large fireball. Grabbing a fire extinguisher, Carrie hurried toward the vehicle, trying to fight the flames. The intense heat caused the car to roll backward as people shouted for her to be careful. Hannah, barely able to stand, cried out in despair. Investigators later found that Rowan had placed a jerry can filled with fuel directly in front of Aaliyah's seat, ensuring the explosion would happen right at her feet. Although Rowan did not have any fuel on him, each of the children and Hannah did. As the fire intensified, Rowan suddenly jumped back into the burning car. For a brief moment, it looked like he was attempting to rescue the children, but instead, he grabbed something and then jumped back out. A bystander witnessed Rowan taking a knife from the car and shouted a warning to Carrie, who was still trying to put out the flames with a fire extinguisher. Realizing the danger, she quickly moved away as Rowan, now armed, got ready to make his final move. Rowan knelt on the ground, placed the knife against his chest, and fell forward onto it. He curled into a fetal position and died shortly after. The destruction he caused was irreversible. In one morning, Rowan had killed his 3 children, Aaliyah, Liana, Trey, and left Hannah severely burned over most of her body. Even as emergency responders arrived, Hannah's thoughts were consumed by her children. She repeatedly asked, "Are they okay? Did someone save them?" The paramedics understood the grim reality and realized there was nothing they could say to alleviate her suffering. Instead, they encouraged her to focus on her own health. Knowing she was close to losing consciousness with 97% body burns, that night, Hannah passed away from her injuries, becoming the last member of her family to die. After Rowan's death, authorities discovered a disturbing note on his phone that said, "I'm ending your game. I no longer want to participate. You can't interfere with someone's life like this and expect them to accept it. I've told the kids that you love them. I'm sure they will miss you." The autopsy reports revealed the tragic details of what occurred. Hannah died from multiple organ failure due to severe burns. Aaliyah, just 6 years old, had burns covering over 100% of her body. Although her blood tested positive for high levels of carbon monoxide, that was not the cause of her death, indicating she was still alive when the flames engulfed her. Liana, only 4 years old, died from direct burns, smoke inhalation, and other fire-related injuries. Trey, who was not yet 3 years old, suffered the same fate. Rowan, who had stabbed himself in the heart, had neither alcohol nor banned substance in his system. His brain showed no signs of disease or injury, which confirms that his horrific actions were not due to a mental breakdown, but rather a deliberate and calculated intent. The tragic events of February 19, 2020 deeply affected Australia. Many realized that coercive control, the subtle yet harmful emotional and psychological abuse that Rowan inflicted on Hannah for years, was not widely recognized as a form of domestic violence. On March 9, 2020, Hannah, Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey were buried together in one coffin. Her brother, heartbroken by the tragedy, expressed his sorrow with these final words. He is so sorry he couldn't protect her.
Is it possible to distort a sober mind so much that a person would take up arms and go on a killing spree? Today's story shows that it is indeed possible. It is hard to find a more merciless and senseless attack. Morgan Metzer and her husband, Rodney Metzer, were inseparable, as often joked by their friends, family. They met when she was 14 and he was 17. From the moment they met, it was love at first sight. What followed was a tender, loving relationship that continued to develop until they decided to tie the knot in 2009. Morgan was just 21 years old at the time. After their wedding, they went on a honeymoon, and upon returning, both continued to build their lives, strengthen their love. However, not everything went as smoothly as they had hoped. Less than a year into their marriage, Rodney suffered his first major loss. His younger brother Kevin, who had just turned 19, died of leukemia. According to Morgan, her husband changed after that, becoming harsher and more rude. She believed that this behavior would gradually pass and that her husband would return to normal. But even after years, he did not change and instead became increasingly cruel. Rodney began to cling to her for any reason, was very demanding, and did not tolerate criticism. Despite this, Morgan remembered the beginning of their life together fondly and did not want to leave her husband, hoping that everything would work out. On March 15, 2011, they had their first child, a boy named Kevin in honor of Rodney's deceased brother. Morgan and Rodney believed that this baby would allow them to restore their relationship and make Rodney more gentle. However, Kevin was born 2 weeks prematurely with a congenital heart defect. The child lived only 18 days before passing away, never having been discharged from the hospital. This tragedy hit the young father even harder and, of course, traumatized Morgan. She later described that moment as one in which she felt as if she had fallen out of reality, so much so that she could barely remember that period. Despite the tragedy, the Metzer coped. 3 months after losing their first child, they learned that Morgan was pregnant again, this time with twins. They welcomed this second chance to become parents and hoped that things would turn out differently this time. The children were born in 2012 and were healthy. However, contrary to expectations, the tension between the spouses only grew. Morgan often communicated with her loved ones and described her relationships with them during this period as psychological abuse. For the first time, she suspected that she had been living in a delusion all these years. She began to realize that her husband was a manipulative person who cruelly controlled her. Looking back, she recognized that Rodney had always been like this. It just took time and significant trauma for his true behavior to manifest fully. Many believe that Morgan had fallen into the trap of a manipulator because of her lack of life experience. She had been with him since she was 14 and had never been in another relationship. In fact, she did not know that it could be different. The situation only worsened when Rodney lost his job. Morgan was on maternity leave and caring for the twins, which meant she could not earn money. Their financial situation became difficult. Rodney soon had to take on 2 jobs to provide for their large family. He became very tired, which only made him angrier. Morgan decided to take action. When the children grew a little, she took matters into her own hands and opened a small interior design business. Contrary to her husband's expectations, Morgan was successful. She began to earn good money. Against the backdrop of her relatives' depressed state, she even became the primary breadwinner in the household. She hired her best friend to work with her. The first confirmation of Morgan's success came in 2020 when she received an award in her hometown for the best interior design. Rodney did not support her during this time. On the contrary, he felt like a failure compared to his more successful wife. He became more jealous and angry. He escalated from psychological violence to physical abuse. This happened for the first time during one of their joint weekends when they went boating together. They had an argument on the water, and when they returned home, Rodney hit his wife several times. This was a shocking moment for Morgan, as Rodney had always spoken out against physical violence and positioned himself as a fighter for women's rights. He had always presented himself as a kind and sensitive person, even refusing to watch films that depicted cruelty to women. His punch was the breaking point. Morgan now realized with horror who she had spent most of her life with. That night, she called her father and asked him to pick her up from their lake house. When her father arrived, Rodney denied hitting her. He then fully demonstrated his manipulative nature, somehow convincing all of Morgan's friends that she had given herself a couple of bruises to make him look bad. According to him, during an argument, she would hit herself, leaving marks on her own face. He claimed that any bruises on her resulted from his attempts to stop her crazy behavior for her own good. The manipulator went further. He had been communicating with his wife for a long time and even managed to convince her that she was partly to blame for what had happened. From that moment on, Rodney began to use this tactic constantly. He influenced her and set his wife up so that she gradually began to believe that the problems and quarrels in their family were her fault. He even blamed her for his career problems. At this point, the violence against Morgan only intensified. In addition to the psychological impact, she also suffered from abuse. But this could not continue forever. In 2020, Morgan decided it was time to put an end to it and filed for divorce. This decision immediately felt like a breath of fresh air. In December 2020, the marriage was officially dissolved. Morgan decided to move on, but she could not completely rid herself of her ex-husband since they had children together. When the decision to divorce was made, they did not go to court to divide custody. Instead, they agreed on everything verbally and remained on good terms in order to spare the younger generation from further hurt. The former spouses communicated closely and even took a joint trip to Florida to visit Morgan's sister before Christmas. Morgan and Rodney insisted that although the marital relationship was over, they continued to get along well for the sake of the children. Suddenly, on New Year's Eve, Morgan was attacked. Early in the morning of January 1st, 2021, Rodney arrived at his ex-wife's house. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. So, he walked around the house, thinking she was still asleep, calling her name. Suddenly, he found her on the back porch. She was lying partially naked on the deck with her hands tied behind her back and a pillowcase over her head. She was obviously badly hurt. Rodney provided first aid and asked her what had happened. He then called 911. Upon arrival, law enforcement officers recorded that Morgan had been subjected to cruel treatment, abuse, and beating. She was very scared and had difficulty explaining what had happened. Morgan stated that a stranger in a black mask had broken into her home that night, attacked her, hit her in the face, strangled her several times until she lost consciousness, and abused her. He threatened to kill her and even mentioned her ex-husband and relatives who no longer lived with her. The police began to investigate what had happened. In the presence of her relatives, who were already there, they recorded Morgan's story. She had intended to spend this New Year's Eve with her best friend. She waited until the new year, drank a glass of champagne, and realized she was too tired from the shocks of the previous month, so she decided to go home and go to bed early. Her friends had argued a little about this, but Morgan insisted that she wanted to rest and regain her strength. At that time, her 8-year-old children were visiting her parents, giving Morgan the opportunity to enjoy her first good night's sleep in several weeks. Morgan returned home, turned on the security system, and went to bed. She woke up during the night, feeling that someone was in the room. Morgan noticed a dark figure in the doorway. At first, she thought she was imagining things. When she looked closely, she realized this was not a dream. The man was dressed in black and wore a mask that looked like Batman's. The tall figure appeared very menacing, standing with his fists clenched as if preparing to attack. A gun appeared in Hi's hand. He pounced on the defenseless woman, hit her with the weapon, and then punched her in the face several times. After that, he turned her over onto her stomach and tied her hands behind her back with makeshift restraints made from plastic zip ties. She begged him to let her go, but the man ignored her pleas, only throwing out a few phrases about how she would regret what she had done. Morgan had the feeling that the stranger was deliberately straining his voice, as if trying to imitate Batman's tone and image. The most horrific aspect for her was the beatings and strangulation. She lost consciousness several times, and each time she regained it, the violence resumed. Morgan was convinced she would not survive the night. The criminal tortured her, bringing her to the brink of death and then allowing her to breathe. This became the worst memory of Morgan's life. She even said she had an out-of-body experience because of the attack, as if she had left her body and was witnessing her own death. She abstracted herself from the events, thinking about her children and what would happen to them. She remembered that she had not even had time to write a will. Meanwhile, the beatings continued. The attacker abused Morgan while continuing to hit her in the face and head. When Morgan later recounted this to law enforcement officers, she expressed disbelief that anyone could want to do such a thing to her. However, she was sure that the voice changes and the dark clothing covering every part of the attacker's body were meant to prevent her from recognizing him, suggesting that he must have been familiar with her. Experienced detectives agreed with this assessment. It is worth noting that the criminal threatened not only Morgan but also her husband. Despite being officially divorced at this time, during another instance of strangulation, the attacker said she would miss her husband. At that moment, Morgan suspected that Rodney himself could be behind the attack. Once this thought crossed her mind, she attempted to play his usual psychological game. Instead of addressing her attacker directly, she began to manipulate his feelings, begging him not to hurt Rodney because she loved Rodney very much. As soon as she said this, the assault immediately stopped. The criminal ceased beating her, left her on the bed, and began walking around the room looking for valuables, likely to steal. When this change occurred, Morgan realized that she had managed to save her life. The criminal had completely altered his behavior and began to act not like a murderer but as a robber. He took the first thing he could find from her locker and then asked for her phone number and password. As it turned out, he was not interested in bank cards but in the security system. There were several video cameras installed in the house that recorded the attack. After rummaging through her mobile phone, he carried she out onto the back porch and left her there, telling her that she should not move until she heard 2 car horns, otherwise, he would return and shoot her. He put a pillowcase over her head so she couldn't see anything. Morgan lay in this state for more than half an hour. She didn't hear any beeps, but she decided it was better not to take any chances and continued to lie still. It seemed to her that the criminal might be hiding nearby and watching her. It is worth noting that Morgan lived in a remote area of the city, where there were few houses nearby, so she could not even call for help. When about 40 minutes had passed in this state, Morgan heard extraneous noises and footsteps. She thought that the criminal might have changed his mind and was now returning to kill her. When the steps got closer and stopped, she heard the familiar voice of her relatives. Rodney had found his ex-wife there, bound in plastic zip ties with a pillowcase over her head. It was about 2 a.m. The very appearance of her ex-husband in Morgan's house at that time seemed strange. The children were visiting their grandparents, and they had not arranged to meet. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Morgan kept herself in check. She pretended to be hysterical, did not chase her ex away, and did not accuse him of the attack. On the contrary, Morgan began to act more cunningly. She tried to persuade Rodney to stay with her, call for help, and not go anywhere. In fact, her goal was to keep the alleged criminal there until the police arrived. When the emergency services were called, several police officers went to Morgan's house. At this time, Rodney was sitting outside in his car. This seemed odd, since he was the one who found his wife tied up and beaten. It would have been logical for him to be next to her, waiting for help. Instead, he was acting cautiously and even somewhat hostile. The law enforcement officers immediately began to ask themselves the same questions that had appeared in Morgan's head. What was her ex-husband doing in the house at 2 a.m. on New Year's Eve, just 40 minutes after the attack? Rodney justified his behavior by claiming romantic feelings and mentioning a strange young man. He said he was celebrating New Year's alone and thinking about his ex-wife. When a stranger stopped in front of the window and wrote the name Morgan on the frozen glass, it seemed alarming, so he decided to call her. After several unsuccessful attempts, he decided to go to the house himself because he felt that something was wrong. Rodney lived 15 minutes away from his ex-wife, so he arrived at her house relatively quickly, and for good reason. She really needed help. Detectives soon began to assess the situation. Morgan was so beaten that one of her eyes was swollen and almost completely shut. It was obvious that she had been the victim of a brutal attack by someone who was emotionally upset or angry at her, rather than by a random stranger or a burglar. Morgan's father and brother soon arrived at the scene. It was decided to speak to everyone present separately. Once Morgan was pulled aside, out of earshot from the rest of the family and her ex-husband, she made a significant confession. She claimed that it was Rodney who had not attacked her and was now posing as her savior to divert suspicion away from himself. The victim described the sequence of events in detail, including the moment when she began to profess her love for her ex, after which the beating abruptly stopped. She insisted that she recognized her ex-husband's touch, for example, when he lifted her from the bed to carry her to the porch. Morgan admitted that all this time she had deliberately kept Rodney nearby by asking him to stay with her. Morgan was afraid that if she directly accused her ex, he could kill her to cover his tracks. From a psychological perspective, this seemed plausible, as the most dangerous period for a woman who has been in a manipulative relationship for a long time is often the breakup. Morgan stated that for a week after the divorce, Rodney continued obsessively trying to maintain contact, seeking her pity. He even claimed that he had cancer, showing her a doctor's report. Considering that his brother had died of leukemia and his father was battling cancer during that period, this strategy evoked sympathy. Naturally, this sympathy did not lead to anything good. He was simply trying to get closer again because of his feelings. Morgan allowed him to spend the night at her house. A couple of days later, Rodney began persistently pushing to restore their relationship through pity and manipulation. By December 31st, she had realized this and finally broke off contact with him, cutting off her support. Rodney returned to his apartment, but less than a day later, she was brutally attacked. Throughout that day, Rodney tried to persuade her to rekindle their relationship, even stating that he had found a new high-paying job for her sake. He slipped a check for $56,000 under her door on New Year's Eve. Curiously, the man who attacked Morgan stole that check. None of this seemed like a coincidence. When Morgan laid out the facts to the police, her greatest fear was that the detectives would believe her manipulative ex-husband instead of her. This had happened multiple times before, even with people close to her. It was a huge relief when one of the detectives remarked that her story sounded quite convincing and that Rodney should be scrutinized closely. The detectives decided to catch the criminal in a lie, and to do this, they needed to verify each of his statements. They started with the calls he claimed to have made to his wife before he arrived. Morgan denied receiving any calls when the bastards took her cell phone. When investigators checked Rodney's phone, not only were there no outgoing calls on it, but there were numerous undressed photos of his ex-wife, taken as if she were unaware. Judging by the dates, the photos had been taken systematically over the week while Rodney was staying at her house after announcing that he had cancer. It appeared he had been filming her secretly. Additionally, Rodney had numerous photos of her phone, which contained conversations with other men. All this looked like stalking and confirmed the words of Morgan. When Morgan was asked about the photos, she stated that she had no idea about them and had not given permission for them to be taken. This alone was reason enough to bring charges, as it was considered a serious invasion of privacy. Rodney was detained and told outright that he was the assailant. He acted as if this was absurd. After checking Morgan's mobile phone, the police discovered that the criminal had deleted all the footage from the CCTV cameras in her home. However, this also indirectly confirmed the guilt of Rodney, since a random robber could hardly know about the security system of a random victim or how to use it. If the criminal was aware of the cameras, he would likely have chosen a less protected target. It was curious that the intruder knew how to enter the house without triggering the alarm. There were special sensors on all the doors and windows of Morgan's home. They were checked, and no signs of a break-in were found. The entire system remained operational, with the exception of one single window leading to the basement. As it turned out, the intruder had entered through this window. The switch was moved so that it did not work. Presumably, Rodney moved it on purpose while living there after the divorce, as he was planning an attack. The day after the arrest, the police received a search warrant for the suspect's home. When checking for sources of information, they found even more circumstantial evidence. Rodney's browser history was full of disturbing queries, such as, how much do you have to strangle a person to make them lose consciousness but not die, and how to change your voice. He had read an entire book about various psychological techniques for influencing women, titled, 7 Ways to Be a Hero to Your Wife. The doctor's note that confirmed Rodney's cancer diagnosis turned out to be fake. He had created a fake email account specifically to send himself a report from a fictitious doctor. During interrogation, Rodney found excuses for every suspicious fact that the police uncovered. After the first interrogation, the detectives decided that they did not have enough evidence against the main suspect. Rodney was released, and the investigation continued. The big problem for him was the plastic zip ties found in the apartment. Rodney had modified and cut them in a special way to make improvised handcuffs that could be quickly put on and secured to the hands. A whole package of such items was found in his apartment, as well as several sets that had been modified in the same way as those taken from Morgan's hands. When asked about the zip ties, Rodney claimed he had never owned any, as if he had never bought them. Perhaps someone had planted them on him to frame him. Even though they were found in his apartment, the police needed to confirm that Rodney was their owner. They then began checking local hardware stores. That same day, detectives found a video recording of the main suspect buying the zip ties. After that, Rodney didn't even know what to say. The most terrifying finding was the note. A farewell letter was discovered in the relative's apartment, indicating that he had planned to kill Morgan and then himself, leaving the children orphaned. Morgan miraculously managed to save herself by using a psychological trick that stopped the criminal and made him change his mind. He probably thought that not all was lost and that he could get back together with his ex-wife. The hope of a reunion actually saved her life. Among the most valuable pieces of evidence was a video of the facade of the apartment building where Rodney lived. No one came to the windows, and no one wrote Morgan's name with their finger. The criminal himself returned scene after the attack, having been inside for about 4 minutes. Presumably, during this time, he changed his clothes and disposed of the evidence. When leaving the apartment, before driving back to his house, he carried a black bag with him, which he discarded. Unfortunately, it was not found, but investigators believed that Rodney had thus disposed of material evidence. Just 1 day later, Rodney was arrested again. This time, in addition to the charges of violating privacy, They added a whole list of charges that included trespassing, damaging someone else's property, possession of a firearm, robbery with a weapon, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and abuse. He was held without bail. During this period, Morgan's children continued to live with her parents. When she took her twins, there was a difficult conversation in which she tried to explain that their father would no longer be around. For months, Morgan woke up from nightmares, dreaming of an attack, a mask, and a threatening voice. Sometimes, she couldn't even muster the strength to send her children to school because she was afraid to be alone in the house. The prosecutor's office had enough evidence against Rodney to put him behind bars. To avoid subjecting Morgan to the hardships of a trial, a plea deal was offered, and they both agreed to it. 8 months after the attack, on August 4, 2021, Rodney Metzer pleaded guilty to 14 counts related to the assault on his ex-wife. He was sentenced to a total of 70 years in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 25 years, it is understood that the remainder of the sentence will be served on probation. In fact, he will never leave the authorities' sight again for the rest of his life. Interestingly, he forbids even his own mother from visiting him in prison. Rodney is expected to be released in 2046. Morgan underwent therapy and has actually recovered from the trauma she experienced. Morgan said she is dedicated to helping women in similar situations as she was. She is also focused on raising her children. The tragic case of Dr. Teresa Sievers, a story that illustrates how love can transform into betrayal and how greed can lead to horrific violence. How did a dedicated mother and accomplished doctor become the target of a murder scheme? What concealed truths were hidden behind closed doors? Let's delve into this story. Dr. Teresa Sievers was a physician dedicated to her patients. She graduated from Ross University School of Medicine in 1996 and opened her practice in Bonita Springs, Florida. Teresa focused on integrating traditional and alternative medicine to help patients who had run out of other treatment options. Her husband, Mark Sievers, worked as the office manager in her practice. They married in 2003 and had 2 daughters. Mark was initially seen as a supportive husband, but his behavior came under investigation after Teresa's murder. Financial difficulties faced by the family played a significant role in the subsequent events. The conspiracy to murder Dr. Teresa Sievers began at the wedding of Curtis Wayne Wright in May 2015. Mark, who was a guest, confided in Wright about his mental health struggles and his fear that Teresa would take their children away from him. Mark expressed his wish for Teresa to be killed, driven by financial motives concerning her life insurance policies with a total value of $4,433 million. He thought that her death would resolve his problems and provide the financial security he needed. Although initially hesitant, Wright eventually agreed to help Mark, stating that he could deal with the matter in exchange for a share of the insurance payout. Unbeknownst to Mark, Wright then enlisted the help of a third man to assist in the murder, Jimmy Ray Rogers, whom Wright had paid to help him. During his trial, Wright described Rogers as a violent individual with a background involving other murders, suggesting that he was well suited for the violent act against Teresa. Mark outlined 2 possible plans for carrying out the murder. The first plan involved killing Teresa at her home on June 28 and making it look like a burglary. To get ready for this, Mark checked how to access their property by climbing over the backyard fence and trimming bushes to clear a path to the garage. He also coached Wright on how to enter the house and disable the security system. The second plan proposed by Mark was to murder Teresa at her medical office on June 29, disguising it as a mugging. He provided Wright with aerial photos of the office, pointing out a hidden stairwell that Teresa often used when leaving late at night. Mark also shared the access codes for this stairwell with Wright, stressing that no matter where the murder happened, it should appear to be a robbery or burglary. On June 28, 2015, Dr. Teresa returned to her home in Bonita Springs, Florida, after abruptly ending a family vacation in upstate New York. She arrived at Southwest Florida International Airport, where security cameras recorded her pulling her suitcase through the terminal. After calling her husband Mark to let him know she was safe, Teresa got into her car and drove home. Unbeknownst to her, 2 men were already inside her house, waiting to carry out a deadly plan devised by her own husband. Inside the house, Wright and Rogers were lying in wait. Wright had grabbed the hammer from the garage earlier. They had planned this situation carefully over several weeks. When Teresa entered the kitchen, Wright attacked her from behind and struck Teresa once on the head. Shocked by the surprise attack, she turned to face him but received another blow. The violence quickly escalated as Rogers also joined the assault with his own hammer. Together, they violently attacked Teresa, hitting her repeatedly until she collapsed on the floor in a pool of blood. Witnesses later recounted how Teresa fought back, instinctively raising her hands to shield herself from the strikes. Despite her brave attempts to defend herself, she suffered a total of 17 wounds to her head before the kitchen fell silent. Once they were sure Teresa was dead, Wright and Rogers left the scene without triggering the alarm system, which they had previously disabled based on information from Mark. The murder was carried out quickly and left no immediate signs of forced entry, as they had used an unlocked side door to enter. After committing their crime, Wright and Rogers returned to Missouri in their rental car, thinking they had successfully hidden their actions. Meanwhile, Mark received worrying news on the morning of June 29th. His wife, Dr. Teresa, had not shown up for work. Worried about Teresa not being around, Mark called a family friend, Dr. Mark Petrites, to check on her at home. Using the garage code Mark provided, Dr. Petrites entered the home and discovered Teresa lying face down in a pool of blood, with a hammer next to her body. She was cold to the touch, and there were evident signs of a violent struggle. The brutal murder of Dr. Teresa shocked the Bonita Springs community. As a respected physician and mother, her death left many people in disbelief. Friends and patients expressed horror over the violent act against someone who had devoted her life to helping others, marking a tragic loss for the community. After Teresa was found dead, law enforcement launched an investigation. Detectives interviewed her family, friends, colleagues to learn more about her life and any possible threats. They also sought tips from the community, stressing the importance of any information that could help identify the person responsible. Investigators examined various aspects of Teresa's professional and personal life. Initially, they looked into people who had interacted with her or might have held grudges against her, but they did not find any immediate leads. Nearly 2 months later, a major breakthrough occurred when law enforcement received a tip from a source in Missouri. This tip revealed that Wright had confessed to someone about his role in Teresa's murder. Consequently, detectives concentrated their efforts on Wright. They traveled to Missouri to investigate further and gather evidence linking he to the crime. In August 2015, Wright and his accomplice, Rogers, were arrested in Missouri for their involvement in Teresa's murder. Many were surprised by the arrest since neither man was from the local area. A detailed investigation revealed important evidence linking them to the crime. Police carried out search warrants at their homes and collected various items, including clothing and other materials that had been purchased shortly before Teresa's death. The investigation gained traction after detectives received a tip that directed them to Wright. This led to a deeper look into his relationship with Mark, raising suspicions about their possible participation in a murder-for-hire plot. The evidence collected during the arrest was crucial for the trials of both men involved. Initially, Wright denied having any connection to Teresa's murder during police questioning. However, as investigators presented him with evidence, he eventually admitted his involvement. Wright acknowledged that he agreed to carry out the murder for at least $100,000 from Teresa's life insurance policy. In December 2015, Wright accepted a plea deal with prosecutors to avoid a possible capital murder charge. As part of the plea agreement, he confessed to his involvement in the murder and agreed to testify against his co-defendants, Mark Sievers and Jimmy Ray Rogers. In return for his cooperation, he received a 25-year prison sentence for second-degree murder. This deal required him to provide significant assistance to the prosecution in their cases against Mark and Rogers. Wright confessed that he and Rogers traveled from Missouri to Florida with the intention of killing Teresa as part of a plan created by Mark. He revealed that Mark first presented this idea during his wedding in May 2015, citing his financial struggles and the need to eliminate Teresa as a solution. This confession was crucial in proving Mark's direct role in the murder plot. By cooperating with law enforcement, Wright played a key role in the investigation, shedding light on the conspiracy that led to Teresa's tragic death. The investigation uncovered a series of text messages exchanged between Mark and Wright, which clearly outlined their plan to murder Teresa for financial gain and highlighted Mark's direct involvement in organizing the crime. Prosecutors claimed that Mark hired Wright and Rogers to kill Teresa due to financial pressures and fears of losing custody of their daughters. Court documents released during this time revealed serious issues in Mark and Teresa's marriage, such as financial struggles and possible infidelity. The evidence showed that Mark could benefit significantly from Teresa's life insurance policies. On December 4, 2015, shortly after Teresa's funeral, Mark was arrested. He was taken into custody by law enforcement from the Lee County Sheriff's Office. As investigators worked to reconstruct the timeline of events leading up to Teresa's murder, they became confident that they had enough evidence to charge him with first-degree murder. Mark's arrest shifted the case's focus onto him as a key figure in the conspiracy. Initially cooperative with investigators, he started to distance himself as more evidence against him was gathered, resulting in a complicated legal battle. After Mark was arrested, investigators stepped up their efforts to gather more evidence regarding the murder of Dr. Teresa. A key part of this investigation was examining digital evidence, especially GPS data from the rental car. This GPS information provided a detailed record of their route and was essential for creating a timeline of their activities before the murder. The data showed they left Missouri, arriving in Bonita Springs, Florida. Wright even posted a Yelp review for a dumpling restaurant along the way. The GPS device was also linked to an email address belonging to Jimmy Ray Rogers, a close friend of Wright's who had his own criminal record. Surveillance footage from a Florida Walmart showed both men in the area at the time of Teresa's murder. The exact timestamps indicated they reached the Severses' home around 6 a.m., which matched the timeline of Teresa's murder. Additionally, investigators reviewed cell phone records that showed communication between Mark and Wright. These records revealed regular contact leading up to the murder. The fact that Mark and Wright used prepaid phones indicated they were trying to avoid detection, but investigators managed to trace their communications effectively. This digital evidence was crucial in supporting witness testimonies and clarifying how the murder was plotted and carried out. As trial preparations began, prosecutors focused on assembling a solid case against both Curtis Wayne Wright, Mark Severs, and Jimmy Ray Rogers. A key piece of evidence emerged from surveillance footage at a Walmart, where Wright and Rogers were recorded buying items later connected to the murder of Dr. Teresa. The video showed them shopping without attempting to hide their identities while purchasing trash bags, flushable wet wipes, black towels, and a lock-picking kit. These purchases were crucial in proving their intention to commit murder and to dispose of the evidence afterward. Additionally, investigators found fibers from a blue jumpsuit that Rogers had discarded along Highway 47 in Missouri. Forensic analysis showed that these fibers matched those on Teresa's clothing at the crime scene, providing a direct connection between Rogers and the murder. This physical evidence strengthened the prosecution's case by confirming that both men were present during the crime. The prosecution collected digital evidence, including GPS data from the rental car driven by Wright and Rogers, surveillance footage, and forensic findings, built a strong case against the defendants. As the trial dates approached, the prosecution prepared to present this evidence, aiming to prove not only the guilt of Wright and Rogers but also to show Mark's role in planning his wife's murder. After Jimmy Ray Rogers was convicted, Mark Severs faced trial in December 2019. The prosecution prepared a case that relied significantly on the testimony of Curtis Wayne Wright, who had accepted a plea deal. Wright provided essential information about how Mark orchestrated the murder plot, shedding light on the conspiracy that resulted in Teresa's death. During the trial, prosecutors presented various pieces of evidence linking Mark to the crime. This included text messages exchanged between Mark and Wright that discussed the murder and the financial motivations behind it. The prosecution argued that Mark's desire for financial gain from Teresa's life insurance policies was a primary motive for orchestrating her murder. The defense argued that there was no reliable evidence linking Mark to the murder. They pointed out that the state had only established that Wright and Rogers, not Mark, were responsible for Teresa's death. To weaken Wright's testimony, the defense highlighted his criminal history, which included several felony convictions and mental health issues, such as bipolar disorder. They claimed that Wright had a reason to lie in order to get a lighter sentence for himself. Furthermore, the defense suggested that Wright might have been influenced by law enforcement during his questioning, implying he was just repeating a story given to him by the investigator. They also noted that Wright had not taken a polygraph test, which could have either supported or damaged his credibility as a witness. The defense wrapped up its arguments by asking jurors to doubt the credibility of Wright's statements and to note the absence of direct evidence connecting Mark to the crime. Throughout the trial, jurors were shown consistent forensic evidence, such as fibers from a blue jumpsuit discarded by Rogers that matched those found on Teresa's body. Despite this, the defense continued to argue that Mark was not involved in either planning or carrying out the murder. The prosecution effectively showed that Mark had not only planned the murder but had also enlisted Wright and Rogers to help carry it out. After a brief deliberation of about 4 hours, the jury found Mark Sievers guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit murder. After the verdict, Mark entered the sentencing phase, where jurors would decide on his punishment. This decision depended on whether they identified aggravating factors that justified a death sentence or mitigating circumstances that could lead to a lesser penalty. Mark was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and the sentencing phase began on December 11, 2019, shortly after the verdict was announced. The prosecution aimed to prove two main aggravating factors: that the murder was executed in a cold, calculated, premeditated way, and that it was motivated by financial gain. They presented evidence from the trial, including Wright's testimony about Mark's role in planning the murder and the financial incentives involved. Victim impact statements were also shared to illustrate the emotional effects of Teresa's murder on her family and community. The defense sought to provide evidence that would reduce Mark's culpability by emphasizing his lack of a criminal history and his relationships with his daughters. Family members testified about his role as a father and husband, painting a positive picture of him. However, they struggled to counter the strong evidence put forth by the prosecution. On January 3, 2020, after careful consideration, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty for Mark Sievers. They concluded that the evidence showed he had committed the murder with cold, calculated premeditation, although they found insufficient evidence for the claim that he acted for financial gain. During the sentencing hearing, Mark spoke to the court, insisting on his innocence, expressing his love for Teresa and their daughters. He pleaded for mercy, asking to avoid the death penalty. Despite his pleas and the defense's arguments for a lighter sentence, Judge Bruce Kyle sentenced him to death for orchestrating Teresa's murder. The judge highlighted the importance of the jury's recommendation and pointed out that Mark's actions showed a complete disregard for human life. In addition to the death sentence for first-degree murder, he received a 30-year prison sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, which will be served consecutively. The sentencing phase is complete, and Mark Sievers is now dealing with major legal hurdles as he prepares to appeal his conviction and his sentence. Currently, he is on death row at the Union Correctional Institution in Florida while these appeals are underway. After his sentencing, Mark has consistently claimed his innocence, insisting that he did not arrange the murder of his wife, Teresa. Mark remains on death row, but continues to protest the verdict. In February 2025, a judge granted him an evidentiary hearing, which will determine whether he is granted a new trial. The tragic case of Dr. Teresa Sievers is a heartbreaking tale of betrayal and greed, a testament to how love and trust can be corrupted by dark motives. A devoted mother and a talented physician, Teresa became the victim of a murder plot orchestrated by the husband she once trusted. Secrets kept behind closed doors, combined with financial pressures and moral turpitude, led to a tragic end that took the life of a precious human being and left indelible pain for her family, friends, and the Bonita Springs community. The case not only exposed the brutality of the crime, but also served as a sobering reminder of the consequences of greed and a lack of compassion. While Mark Sievers faces a death sentence and continues to appeal, Teresa's story remains a reminder that justice, even when served, cannot fully undo the damage caused by crime. Mariana Baza, a 19-year-old physiotherapy student, studied at a private university near her hometown of Bariri. Born in 2000, She was the only child of Ayrton and Marlene Forty, a couple devoted to their daughter. Her family described her as a bright, kind, and compassionate person, always full of smiles and warm words. Her love for physiotherapy went beyond just choosing a career. It reflected her caring personality and desire to help others heal and find relief from pain. Her parents were immensely proud of her dedication. At university, she was a hardworking student who managed to balance her studies with an active social life. She made friends easily, whether at school or at the gym where she worked out regularly. Mariana had been in a 3-year relationship with her boyfriend, Jefferson Viana. At 22, Jefferson was serving in the Brazilian Navy in São Paulo. The two had met in their late teens and built a strong relationship founded on mutual respect and shared aspirations. They were a loving couple, often sending each other playful messages and celebrating life's milestones together. On the morning of September 24, 2019, Mariana and Jefferson were exchanging their usual texts. While they faced challenges like any young couple, especially the distance caused by his Navy duties, they maintained their bond through calls and messages. There were no signs of any issues between them. They were happy and planning their future together. That morning, everything in Bariri seemed normal. Around 7 a.m., the sun was just beginning to rise, and Mariana was already starting her day. She was at the gym with her friend, Heloisa Passarello, fitting in an early workout to clear her mind and stay active. The gym was a familiar place for Mariana, where she often balanced exercise with catching up with friends. By 8 a.m., the workout was over. At 8:11 a.m., Mariana walked out of the gym, with Heloisa following a few steps behind. The street outside was quiet, lined with homes and a few parked cars. Mariana, carrying her phone, appeared to be checking notifications or organizing her thoughts about the day ahead, classes, assignments, and maybe a quick text to Jefferson. She was focused, with a busy schedule ahead. As she approaches the car, the camera catches her slowing down, her head tilted slightly as if noticing something unusual. At 8:12 a.m., she stopped at the front passenger side of her Volkswagen. Her tire was completely flat, so deflated it would be impossible to drive. Heloisa lingered near the gym entrance, watching Mariana by her car. Mariana looked more annoyed than worried. Surveillance footage showed her pulling out her phone, possibly deciding who to call for help, maybe her dad, her reliable go-to for car issues, or her cousin, who lived nearby. However, she didn't make a call, at least not right away. The street wasn't empty. The footage captured a man crossing from the opposite sidewalk toward Mariana's car. He was dressed casually in jeans and a plain shirt. However, the cameras couldn't clearly capture his face due to the distance and grainy quality of the feed. He approached Mariana directly, calm and purposeful, exuding a friendly demeanor as he offered to help with her flat tire. Mariana hesitated. She was not naive and was thinking whether to drive to her father's house or call someone she felt she could trust. However, the man was persistent. He warns her that driving on a flat tire could damage the wheel, making her believe that he truly cares about her. Around 8:15 a.m., Heloisa, Mariana's friend, had to leave for work. She got on her motorcycle and rode off. Meanwhile, the man continued speaking with Mariana, his gestures becoming more animated as he attempted to convince her. By 8:28 a.m., the situation shifted. Footage from the gym's cameras showed the man pointing across the street toward a small chakra, a rural property with a house and some land. He claimed he could properly fix the tire there and persuaded Mariana to follow him. Although hesitant and cautious, Mariana eventually agreed. At 8:29 a.m., she drove her Volkswagen across the street into the chakra's yard. Once she entered, the gate closed behind her, and her car disappeared from the camera's view. That was the last time Mariana was seen alive in public. The chakra's yard, hidden by walls and the closed gate, was a blind spot, outside the coverage of the gyms and nearby cameras. The street soon returned to its normal routine, unaware of the danger unfolding just out of sight. Before disappearing, Mariana had taken a picture of the man kneeling by her car and sent it to her boyfriend, Jefferson. Their conversation was lighthearted, typical of their 3-year relationship. Mariana didn't seem fearful when she sent the photo. Instead, she laughed about the situation. Jefferson didn't sense any danger either. By noon, Jefferson tried messaging Mariana again but got no response. Her phone, usually active with notifications, was completely silent. He called her, but the call went directly to voicemail. Later, he recalled noticing that her phone appeared to have no signal, a detail that would continue to haunt him. His concern grew as the hours passed. Mariana was supposed to attend her physiotherapy classes in Bauru, a 30-mile drive from her hometown of Bariri. She had never missed a class without notifying someone beforehand. By 2 p.m., Jefferson began contacting her friends to see if anyone had heard from her, but no one had. Growing increasingly worried, he reached out to her family, including her parents, Berton and Marlene, as well as her aunts and cousins, all of whom were very close to her and maintained regular contact. The family grew equally alarmed. Her father, Ayrton, repeatedly tried calling her, but her phone remained off. By 3 p.m., the family was convinced that something was seriously wrong. They contacted the Bariri police to report Mariana missing and emphasized the urgency of the situation. The police promptly filed a missing persons report and began gathering information from her close contacts. Jefferson was interviewed first. He shared the photo and text messages Mariana had sent him that morning. The photo, time-stamped around 8:30 a.m., showed a man crouched next to Mariana's Volkswagen, working on a tire. His face was partially visible, but the angle of the photo made it difficult to identify him. Jefferson told the police that everything had seemed normal. Mariana hadn't appeared uncomfortable, and the man looked like a helpful passerby. The police considered the photo an important lead, but more information was needed. They asked Jefferson if Mariana had any enemies or recent conflicts. He insisted that she was well-liked and had no issues in her personal life, adding that their relationship was happy and stable. His alibi was verified, as he was in Sao Paulo fulfilling his naval duties at the time. His colleagues confirmed his whereabouts. Investigators then spoke to one of Mariana's gym friends, Heloisa, who had been with her earlier that morning. Heloisa confirmed the timeline of the incident. Mariana had finished her workout around 8 a.m., and they chatted briefly before stepping outside together. It was then that Mariana noticed the flat tire on her car. A man approached and offered to help her. Heloisa did not recognize the man, but she described him as friendly and non-threatening in appearance. She recalled that Mariana was hesitant at first but eventually let him assist after he pointed out that driving on the flat tire could damage the wheel. She left around 8:15 a.m., assuming everything was fine. Later, when speaking to the police, she expressed deep guilt, wishing she had stayed with Mariana longer. Heloisa's description of the man was vague: average height, casual clothes. However, it matched the person in the photo Mariana had sent to Jefferson. When police asked Heloisa for more information, asking if she had noticed anyone else in the area or anything suspicious, she mentioned only a few people exercising and passers-by, but did not see anything unusual. The busy morning traffic made spotting anything unusual difficult. The police reviewed the gym's CCTV footage, which showed Mariana driving into a nearby property, referred to as the Chakra, at 8:29 a.m. They visited the location, which was owned by a local resident who had hired a handyman, Rodrigo Pereira Alves, to paint it. The owner confirmed that Rodrigo had been there that morning but said he had since disappeared. The officers inspected the area but found no signs of Mariana or her car. However, another surveillance tape revealed her Volkswagen being driven away an hour later. The footage showed the driver stepping out briefly, and their clothing made it clear the driver was not Mariana. The photo Mariana had sent to Jefferson became critical evidence. Police have secretly launched an investigation into the man in the photo without releasing his identity to avoid exposure. They discovered he had a criminal history, including serious offenses, which raised suspicions. The flat tire, possibly deliberately slashed, suggested a premeditated plan rather than a random event. The police initiated covert surveillance near the suspect's last known location while tracking Mariana's phone. Its last signal came from the gym's area and went offline around 8:36 a.m., likely turned off or destroyed. Knowing her car had been driven away, officers issued an alert to neighboring towns with details about the Volkswagen and the man in the photo, now their primary suspect. The car was last seen heading west toward Attapulgite. In response, authorities expanded the search operation, deploying reinforcements, including a helicopter and additional officers. By 5 p.m., word had already spread quickly throughout Bariri. Everyone was talking animatedly, texting, and trying to piece together the details of the event. They were tracking a car and following clues from a photo. Soon, a name surfaced: Rodrigo Pereira Alves. He was a career criminal with a long history of offenses, including robbery, kidnapping, extortion, and attempted robbery. He had served 12 years in prison and had been released just 30 days before Mariana's kidnapping. The photo Mariana had sent matched him, as did footage from nearby CCTV cameras. As the evening progressed, the search intensified. By 8 p.m., the effort was relentless, with helicopters in the air and patrol teams on the ground. At around 9 p.m., the search team located the Volkswagen abandoned in Attapulgite, near a sugarcane plantation. The car was immediately secured, and forensic investigators began their work. The vehicle was found with its doors unlocked, keys missing, and interior in disarray. Evidence showed a violent struggle had taken place, with scratches on the dashboard, torn seatbelts, and severe damage to the interior of the car. Under the seat, police found a knife, though it wasn't believed to have been used in the crime. There was no blood, but the evidence made it clear something serious had taken place. After discovering the car, authorities intensified their pursuit of Rodrigo. He had grown up in a troubled home, dropped out of school early, and turned to crime as a teenager. Known as a loner, he worked sporadic jobs in construction and mechanics but had no stable employment. Few people in the community were even aware he was out of prison, as his return had gone unnoticed. Using cell phone tracking, the police discovered that he was hiding at a relative's house. Officers surrounded the area, but Rodrigo, realizing he was trapped, attempted to escape by climbing onto a nearby rooftop. After a tense standoff, he was captured. Disheveled and gaunt, he initially resisted and denied involvement, but the evidence against him, including Mariana's photo, surveillance footage, and tire tracks, was overwhelming. Eventually, he provided information on where Mariana could be found. The search for Mariana led investigators back to the sugarcane plantation where the car had been abandoned. Late the next morning, they made a devastating discovery. Mariana's body was found hidden about a mile from the car, concealed among the dense sugarcane stalks. She was gagged, blindfolded, and her hands were tied behind her back. The scene was heartbreaking. An autopsy performed revealed that her cause of death was strangulation. Her injuries were severe: bruises on her arms and legs, scratches on her face, and broken fingernails, all indicating she had fought desperately against her attacker. The autopsy also investigated the possibility of abuse, though the results remained inconclusive, as further testing was required. No stab wounds or gunshot injuries were found, ruling out the knife discovered in the car as a weapon. The coroner estimated that she had died within hours of her disappearance, likely between 8 a.m. and noon on September 24th. The presence of the bindings and gag indicated that she had been restrained before her death, suggesting a deliberate and brutal act. Rodrigo was charged with kidnapping, abuse, robbery, and murder as prosecutors built their case using physical evidence and his prior criminal record. The prosecution argued that he had used the pretense of offering help to gain Mariana's trust, overpowering her in the yard of the property. Investigators noted a clear pattern of impulsive and predatory behavior, consistent with his criminal past. But why was Rodrigo even in Bariri? It turned out he had obtained the job through a friend, claiming that it was part of a fresh start. Rodrigo admitted to luring Mariana to the chakra, stating that the incident happened on a whim. He claimed to have hitched a ride with her car after fixing her tire, then took her into his house and panicked when she tried to leave. However, investigators dismissed his claims of panic, labeling the act as cold and calculated. In early 2021, more than a year after Mariana was murdered on September 24, 2019, the trial of Rodrigo began at the Judicial Center near Bariri. The courtroom was filled with family, friends, locals, and media outlets, all focused on Rodrigo, a 39-year-old defendant who sat expressionless in the dock. The prosecution, led by experienced attorneys, aimed to prove that Rodrigo was a calculated predator. They presented critical evidence, including CCTV footage from the gym and a photo Mariana had sent to her boyfriend. The prosecution highlighted key points in their case. One piece of evidence was the flat tire on Mariana's car, believed to have been deliberately slashed, which, they argued, demonstrated premeditation. They painted Rodrigo as someone who targeted Mariana, manipulated her trust, and meticulously planned her abduction and murder. His criminal history became a focal point: 12 years in prison for kidnapping and attempted murder, having only recently been released before the crime occurred. The autopsy report was damning, describing strangulation, bruises, and defensive wounds that all suggested a violent struggle. The prosecution argued that Mariana was likely strangled with her own shirt during the attack. The defense faced a challenging case and employed strategies to cast doubt and downplay the prosecution's arguments. They highlighted gaps in the forensic evidence, emphasizing the absence of blood or DNA to conclusively prove abuse. They also claimed the knife found in the car could belong to anyone. Despite their efforts, it was clear the odds were against them. Mariana's family, including her parents, Ayrton and Marlene, as well as other relatives, attended all of the court proceedings, their grief evident on their faces. The prosecution called them as witnesses to testify about Mariana's character, portraying her vibrancy and the profound loss her death had caused. Marlene, her mother, described her daughter as their everything, highlighting that she was always smiling and always helping others. Jefferson, Mariana's boyfriend, also testified, tearfully recalling their last messages and the haunting photo she had sent him. He confessed emotionally to the court that he would never forgive himself for not realizing that she was in danger. The prosecution used the testimony to emphasize the manipulation and betrayal of trust that Rodrigo had committed against Mariana, a point that the jury had to consider. Another surveillance video captured Rodrigo leaning against Mariana's car before she left the gym, further supporting the claim that he had intentionally sabotaged her vehicle to trap her. Rodrigo's defense team did not contest his presence at the crime scene, that was undeniable. Instead, they focused on portraying him as mentally unstable, arguing that his 12 years in prison had left him impulsive and erratic, rather than a calculated killer. They did not deny the crime itself but tried to reduce its severity, aiming for a conviction of manslaughter rather than femicide to lessen his sentence. In March 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Rodrigo Pereira Alves was sentenced to 40 years, 10 months, and 18 days in prison. But the story didn't end there. Mariana's mother, Marlene, who had become a vocal advocate for preserving her daughter's memory, passed away in February 2022 at the age of 51. On September 23, 2024, just one day before the 5th anniversary of Mariana's murder, Rodrigo died from an unspecified illness in the intensive care unit of Boticata Hospital. While it was reported that he suffered from a chronic disease, details of his exact cause of death were not disclosed by the prison or the hospital. Let's look at the events that took place in Kershaw, South Carolina, on December 26, 2011. A 30-year-old woman named Hope Melton called her grandmother to express her fear that someone was following her while she was driving on a rural road. Unfortunately, the call was cut off before Hope could provide more details. To investigate the case, the police reviewed CCTV footage, which helped them identify the suspect. Hope Melton, whose full name was Beverly Hope Roscoe Melton, was born on December 4, 1981, in Cheraw, South Carolina. She was the daughter of William Roger and Elizabeth Ray Hodge Roscoe. Hope graduated with honors from Chesterfield High School in 2000, where she participated in various organizations, including the Beta Club, the Vocational Honor Society, the Health Occupations Class, and the Chorus. At the time of her death, she was managing T&T Country Store in McBee, South Carolina, and actively attended Lancaster Church of God, where she taught children's church. Hope had been happily married to Gary Lee Melton for just over a year, and they were excited about starting a family. Unfortunately, Christmas 2011 was the last holiday they spent together. On December 26th, Hope planned to visit her grandmother, who lived about 30 miles away, for lunch. However, during the drive, she called her grandmother in a distressed voice, saying someone was following her and asking for help. The call was suddenly disconnected, leading Hope's mother and grandmother to rush out to search for her. About 5 miles from their location, they noticed Hope's car parked on the side of a rural road, but Hope was missing. Her grandmother immediately called 911. The call was sent to the county sheriff's office, and it was classified as a missing person case. Quick action is crucial in such situations. One of the sheriff's office deputies arrived at the scene and examined Hope's car. It was undamaged and in working order, so an accident was ruled out. A forensic team searched the vehicle but discovered no clues about Hope's location. Volunteers and police began searching the neighborhood for any clues. Gary, Hope's husband, who was visibly upset, arrived at the scene and told the police that Hope intended to stop at a gas station on her way to visit her grandmother. This was the only information the detectives had at that moment. Hope's house was about 30 miles from her grandmother's, and there were 4 gas stations along that route. The detectives decided to check each gas station one by one. At the first gas station, the detective in charge of the case reviewed security camera footage in hopes of spotting Hope. Gary mentioned that she left their home around 11:45 a.m., so the detective requested footage from the hour leading up to her distressed call at 12:19 p.m. Initially, a male customer entered the store, and everything seemed normal. 3 minutes later, a woman appeared on the video. Hope was described as being blonde, approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing around 140 pounds, and wearing a pink shirt and blue jeans. However, the detective quickly noted that the woman in the footage was taller than Hope, so it wasn't her. The detective continued to review the tape until 12:45 p.m., but there was no sign of Hope, indicating she may have gotten gas at a different station. Meanwhile, Hope's family was grappling with shock and trying to find reasons for her disappearance. They were hopeful that she was safe and would return home soon. The detective investigating Hope's disappearance visited a second gas station located just 10 miles from where her abandoned car was discovered. This station had surveillance cameras that could provide important evidence. Upon arriving, the detective spoke with the manager and explained that they were searching for a missing woman. After describing Hope's appearance and the car she was driving, the manager remembered possibly seeing her around noon. The footage from the outside camera confirmed that Hope had been at this gas station before she vanished. She had filled up her car and seemed untroubled at that time. Another camera recorded a man holding the door open for her as she entered the store. After buying gas, Hope left the store looking cheerful, as if she was eager to spend time with her grandmother. Upon reviewing the video again, the detective became more interested in the man who had opened the door for Hope than in Hope herself. The footage showed a man in a white cap following her inside. He glanced at her while she paid for her gas and exited the store. The detective decided to focus on identifying the man in the cap, but the footage did not reveal any clues about his identity. The detective aimed to identify the car of a man seen in surveillance footage. One of the recordings showed Hope walking towards the store to pay for gas. At that moment, a dark minivan arrived, and a man wearing a white cap got out, but the license plate was not visible. The detective then switched to another camera that captured Hope driving away from the gas station. As she returned to her car, a gray car appeared, and its driver watched her leave. Neither this driver nor the man in the white cap followed Hope out of the gas station. The detective replayed the footage multiple times to catch every detail, convinced there were more clues in the gas station video. He returned to the footage of Hope walking back to her car and noticed another vehicle, a striking red Chevy. This car crossed the parking lot and headed toward the exit, following Hope as she drove away. The detective realized that he had seen this car tailing Hope right before her disappearance. With evidence that she had been followed from the gas station, the police needed to determine what happened next. The search party discovered alarming evidence 6 miles from Hope's abandoned car, a pink bracelet and a blood-stained blanket. Hope's husband identified the bracelet as a Christmas gift he had given her, raising serious concerns about her safety. On her way to her grandmother's house, Hope passed an office building equipped with numerous surveillance cameras. However, the building was closed for Christmas, making it difficult for the detective to find an office manager with access to the CCTV system. Eventually, he located someone who had the keys and could operate the cameras. The surveillance system only recorded when there was movement, so the detective began reviewing footage from just after noon. He saw Hope's car enter the frame at 12:06 p.m., followed 2 seconds later by the red Chevy seen at the gas station, which was trailing just a few yards behind her. Both vehicles were heading north toward the wooded area where Hope's car was discovered. Although the footage did not clearly show license plates, the red Chevy was recognizable, leading the police to issue an all-points bulletin, APB, for it. It took about an hour or two before this red vehicle was stopped by police on a street in Jefferson, South Carolina. The driver was 23-year-old local resident Nicholas Miller. There was no one else in the car besides him, and he was very nervous when the police pulled him over. Perhaps he had something to hide. He was brought to the police station, where a detective questioned him. Miller answered all questions evasively. The detective asked Miller to describe how he had spent the day, what he had been doing, and where he had been. Miller replied that he had spent the morning shopping at a Walmart store 30 minutes away. He then drove back to Jefferson. Police requested a search warrant for Miller's car, and the detective investigating Hope Melton's disappearance went to Walmart, where Miller said he shopped. Police had to check his story. The store had numerous cameras recording everything that happens on the sales floor. He was driving a red Chevy, and at about 10 a.m., his car pulled into the parking lot. When the driver got out, the detective saw that it was indeed Miller. So far, his story was confirmed. He just walked into Walmart like it was a normal day, like hundreds of other shoppers, and nothing out of the ordinary seemed to be going on. It seemed like he was just going about his normal business. He didn't take a shopping cart or shopping basket, but as the tape played, the detective realized that Miller was no ordinary shopper. He seemed to be just hanging around the store, uninterested in the merchandise being sold there. Perhaps he was in the store for an entirely different purpose. At one point, the detective noticed that Miller was following a woman who was not paying attention to him but was minding her own business. Reviewing the footage further, the detective became convinced that his assumption was correct. Wherever the woman went, Miller followed her. However, a few moments later, she reappeared in the footage again, this time with a man. At this point, it would be safe to assume that Miller realized that this was an unrealistic target for him. A few minutes later, the couple left the store. Investigators speculated that the woman may have been lucky to escape. After a few more minutes, cameras captured Miller leaving the store. As he exited Walmart, it appeared that he was frustrated because a potential target had slipped from his grasp. We can only assume at this point that he was heading back to Jefferson, where he would eventually meet Hope at a gas station. Hope's family had hoped for her safe return home, but when the police obtained a search warrant for Miller's car, it became clear that something terrible had happened to Hope. While examining the car, forensic investigators saw blood spatter on the passenger side fender and on the driver's side bumper. They also found Hope's wallet in Miller's car. Now that the authorities had new evidence, the decision was made to question Miller again. It is important to note that the interrogation was conducted by Chesterfield County Sheriff Sam Parker, a person whose name is significant during this case. During the interrogation, Miller began to deny his involvement in Hope Melton's disappearance, but when informed of the evidence found, he finally admitted his guilt and agreed to take the police to Hope's body. Miller led detectives to a remote turkey farm, 14 miles from where Hope's car was found. She was lying on the ground, on her back, face up, with no clothes on, an utterly horrific scene. Miller was unable to give any reasonable explanation for why he had done it. Hope's family was informed of the discovery of her body. What had happened to her had forever changed the lives of those who knew and loved Hope Melton. Now, the police could finally piece together the events that led to Hope's death. Investigators learned that Miller had recently broken up with his girlfriend, which they believed may have triggered his nervous breakdown. At the gas station, Miller saw Hope filling up her car and decided to follow her. Hope had just enjoyed a wonderful Christmas with her family and was looking forward to spending a special day with her grandmother. Unbeknownst to her, someone was tracking her movements. Once they were on a secluded road, Hope realized she was in danger and called her grandmother for help. Miller later confessed that he had forced Hope off the road, dragged her from her car, and shoved her into his vehicle. He then took her into the woods, assaulted her, and committed further atrocities. To conceal his crime, Miller took Hope to a turkey farm, where he abused, then brutally beat her to death with a baseball bat and disposed of her body. What began as a routine gas stop turned into a terrifying encounter with a predator, leading to a tragic outcome for Hope. The details of this crime are unimaginable. Nicholas Miller has been charged with multiple offenses as the trial approaches. Additionally, his ex-girlfriend provided disturbing evidence, including photos showing Miller chasing her in his car just hours before he kidnapped Hope Melton. Now let's focus on Chesterfield County Sheriff Sam Parker. Parker was fired from the police force for several reasons. Officials accuse him of giving preferential treatment to inmates, taking property meant for the sheriff's office for personal use, providing uniforms, badges, and weapons to civilians. He allowed 2 inmates to live and sleep outside the jail in exchange for doing work on his property. While at the Chesterfield County Prison, where the inmates were allowed to sleep, they had access to the internet, phones, and unlimited unsupervised visitors, all with Parker's knowledge. Prosecutors also claimed that Parker gave inmates special privileges, such as alcohol and unsupervised visits with women. The inmates were allowed to go shopping and eat at restaurants in return for allegedly doing work on Parker's house and personal property. Consequently, Parker faced trial. During the trial, a prisoner, who is serving a 15-year sentence for arson, testified against Parker. He stated that while in the Chesterfield County Jail, he was able to furnish his cell with flat-screen TVs, a refrigerator, and a new mattress, purchasing these items with money sent by his family. A prisoner informed jurors that he had lunch with deputies and was allowed to buy and wear regular clothes instead of his jail uniform. He mentioned that he worked at one of the county's impound lots, where he had access to the internet, phones, and a Facebook account. Eventually, he was moved from jail to the sheriff's office, where he engaged in intimate activities with a female visitor, celebrated his birthday with a party that featured filet mignon and alcohol. It's quite unusual for an inmate to host a party at the sheriff's office. He also stated that a deputy drove him and another inmate in a marked sheriff's office car to Florence, South Carolina, for a lunch date with a female friend. He explained how he became close to Parker by working at his home, attending church with him, and giving gifts to Parker's daughter. In 2014, Parker was convicted of 5 counts of misconduct in office, 2 counts of providing contraband to inmates, and 1 count of embezzlement. He received a 2-year prison sentence with the possibility of parole. As the judge prepared to announce the sentence, the former sheriff became emotional, expressing remorse to the residents of Chesterfield County, his family, and friends. After the verdict was delivered, Parker apologized to his family for the shame he caused and to his fellow law enforcement officers. Previously, Sheriff Sam Parker had interrogated Miller, who confessed to the crime and led the police to Hope Melton's body. Initially, Miller was facing the death penalty, but the sheriff's office actions prevented prosecutors from pursuing that option. During the interrogation, the sheriff promised Miller that if he confessed and disclosed what happened to Hope Melton, he would not receive the death penalty. However, the sheriff did not have the authority to make such a promise. Believing the sheriff, Miller confessed to the crime, which ultimately compromised the case. Attorney Dan Johnson issued a statement saying former Chesterfield County Sheriff Sam Parker had seriously damaged the case. Johnson explained that Sheriff Parker secured a confession from Nicholas Miller by making an illegal promise not to pursue the death penalty. Due to Parker's serious misconduct in coercing Miller's confession with this promise, all statements made in relation to it should be excluded from the trial. In March 2015, 26-year-old Nicholas Miller admitted guilt to all charges and received a life sentence without the chance for parole. Hope Melton's family was outraged and frustrated with the former sheriff. Hope's mother, Elizabeth, expressed disappointment, as they had hoped for a death penalty sentence for Miller. The family is still waiting for an apology from Parker while actively seeking justice and working to honor Hope Melton's memory. In 1995, 11-year-old Lacey Phillips lived with her mother, Mary, her father, James, and her older siblings. Brother Jesse, who was 15 at the time, and sister Darla, who was 17. The family was very close-knit and had a strong bond. The Phillips family lived in their own home in a small town called Bald Knob, Arkansas, which they had moved to 5 years earlier from Hope, Arkansas. They considered Bald Knob an ideal place for family life and raising children. Mary was known as a loving mother and wife, fond of gardening, outdoor recreation. The Phillips family was a typical American family, slowly building their happiness, unaware of how cruelly it would eventually be destroyed. On June 6, 1995, 11-year-old Lacey was under the supervision of her older sister, Darla. Both were students, but summer vacation had begun. Their mothers go to work during this time, and often the children will stay at home waiting for their parents to return. However, at 4 p.m. that day, Lacey had an appointment with the dentist, which coincided with Mary's end of her work shift. Consequently, Darla drove Lacey to the workplace, where their mother worked as an accountant in an automated tax and accounting service. It was planned that Lacey would wait until her mother finished work and then go to the appointment together. Darla later described this outing as completely ordinary. She talked with Mary for a while, and then Darla went home, planning to meet her friends later. She and her mother said goodbye and hugged, unaware that this would be their last meeting. Although Mary and Lacey were expected to be a little late coming back from the dentist, it was merely a routine checkup that wasn't supposed to take long. Meanwhile, Jesse and Darla were left alone at home. Their father was on a business trip 500 kilometers away. The siblings expected their mother and Lacey to return by 5 p.m., but as much more time passed with no sign of mother, they began to worry. At around 6 p.m., both teenagers grew increasingly worried as neither returned from the dentist's office. Lacey is too young to have her own plans, and Mary had no other plans for the evening. Even if something had changed, Mary always called the children to inform them if she would be late. Her uncharacteristic absence without warning heightened their concern. Darla assumed her mother might be late at work, so she called the office but received no answer. Concerned, she then headed to the dental clinic, but there was no sign of Mary or Lacey. Time passed, and as the sun began to set, Darla contacted their father to share their growing worries. He suggested they leave the house and look around the area, considering that Mary's car might have broken down or she might need help. Jesse and Darla searched the vicinity but found nothing. They returned to their house and reported their findings to their father, prompting him to contact the police. A dispatch officer spoke to James to gather necessary information. He provided details about where Mary worked, the car she drove, and their trip to the dentist set for around 4 p.m. The most alarming fact was that Mary and Lacey never reached the dentist. Law enforcement took James's report seriously, confirming that no one had arrived at the dental office. Around midnight, an officer was dispatched to check Mary's workplace. Upon arrival at the parking lot in front of the building, the patrolman noticed a pickup truck parked alone. After checking the license plate, he confirmed it was indeed Mary Phillips' vehicle. This discovery intensified fears that something had gone terribly wrong. The car was intact and locked, so the officer decided to check the office where Mary worked. He knocked on the door, which surprisingly opened because it was unlocked. Upon entering, he found the lights were off and had to use a flashlight to explore. It was then that he discovered something horrifying: the body of a woman covered in blood, with her hands tightly bound behind her back. A cord from a household appliance was wrapped around her neck, and her clothes were pulled down. The officer immediately realized she had been brutally beaten. A pulse check indicated she was dead. The body was cold, suggesting she had been killed hours earlier. The office resembled the aftermath of a violent struggle, with blood scattered around, intensifying concerns that the perpetrator might still be present. The patrolman called for reinforcements and continued to carefully inspect the rooms while waiting for his colleagues to arrive. He checked the office and then moved to the utility rooms, where he noticed a trail of blood leading to another door, which was also unlocked. He entered without any problems and saw a gruesome scene. In the middle of the room was a chair to which a girl was tied, also covered in blood. There was especially a lot of blood. Her face showed clear signs of having received several blows to the head. Thought the girl was dead, he managed to take several pictures of the second victim when she suddenly woke up, opened her eyes, and looked in his direction. Later, the police officer recalled this moment as one of the most terrible and unexpected in his life, as if he had seen a dead person returning to life. The patrolman immediately turned to his colleagues and, in addition to requesting reinforcements, asked them to call for doctors. He freed the girl and tried to provide first aid, but it quickly became obvious that she was in serious condition and that only doctors could fully help her. Despite her injuries, she was conscious and could speak. She clearly stated that her name was Lacey Phillips. The only thing that worried her was her mother's condition. She asked several times what had happened to Mary and if everything was okay with her, but the policeman distracted her from these troubling thoughts, not telling her the truth. The medics arrived a few minutes later, and Lacey was urgently taken to the nearest medical facility. On the way, she regained consciousness and then lost it again. Lacey had sustained a serious head injury from several strong blows to the head with a blunt object. Additionally, marks were found on her neck indicating strangulation, and in addition to sustaining a fracture in her cranial vault, she had a broken jaw. Mary's husband, James, was notified that something had happened to his loved ones but was given no details. He immediately packed his things and left for the city to see his daughter in the hospital to support her. He was shocked and did not understand what had happened to his family. Now, the doctors did not dare to provide a prognosis on whether the Phillips' youngest daughter, Lacey, would survive. An even greater blow was the death of 34-year-old Mary. She could not be saved and had died before the patrolman arrived. Forensic experts worked at the crime scene but were unable to find any clues that would lead to the criminal. Their only hope was Lacey, who had miraculously survived the attack, and they awaited news from the medical center with excitement. A few hours later, doctors managed to stabilize Lacey's condition. The morning after the attack, on June 7th, she woke up in hospital. She was in the intensive care unit, and they were finally able to communicate. Despite her traumatic brain injury, she remembered perfectly what had happened. Later, Lacey admitted that all of it was captured in her memory. Lacey began to recount the frightening details of how her older sister had taken her to their mother's workplace at about 3 p.m. She remained in the office until 3:45 p.m., as both of them were getting ready to go to the dentist's office for a routine checkup. The workday was almost over. But a few minutes before it ended, an unfamiliar man entered the office. He immediately headed to the desk where Mary worked. She and Mary looked at him and even stepped back. There was something frightening in his gaze, but they thought he was just a client who had come into the office. When the stranger raised his hands, it became obvious that he was not there for advice. He was wearing latex gloves. In one hand, he held a roll of wire, and in the other, a gun with which he threatened Mary and Lacey. The man announced that it was a robbery. Mary tried to cover herself and protect her daughter, but he pushed Mary's aside, knocked her to the floor, and began tying her wrists behind her back with the wire. Lacey was confused, scared, and unable to react. Everything happened too quickly. After tying up Mary, the unknown man shouted at Lacey and ordered her to follow him into another room. He brought a chair from Mary's office, placed it in the middle of the room, and forced she to sit on it while he tied her hands to the chair behind her back. She cried, begged him not to harm her and her mother. The criminal said he would not harm Mary but would hurt her daughter. After securing Lacey to the chair with wire, he immediately hit her hard on the head with the handle of the pistol. Her eyes went dark, and she lost consciousness. After which, the stranger left the room, closing the door behind him. Lacey was left alone. She was tightly tied up and couldn't even move. She felt like she was bleeding from her head. Lacey regained consciousness a few minutes later, looked around, and saw that blood was all around the chair. She was in pain, but she couldn't imagine the extent of the head injury she had sustained. She began to scream and call for help, hoping that her mother would enter the room and untie her. The door swung open, and to her horror, it was the same man again. He was furious that she was still alive and screamed, striking she again before grabbing her by the neck and beginning to strangle her until she lost consciousness once more. This lasted for several minutes. Perhaps the criminal was afraid of being caught, so he wanted to escape from the building as quickly as possible. He believed he had killed Lacey, turned off the light, and left the room. The criminal immediately fled the office. Several hours passed. Lacey came to her senses but then lost consciousness again. Each time she regained consciousness, she tried to get free and call for her mother but received no response. Her hands were tightly bound with metal wire. Lacey grew weaker with every minute. The only hope for salvation was the thought that someone would find them. About 8 hours passed during which Lacey remained locked in the dark room, bleeding. She was half asleep, could barely move, and had lost all strength. Suddenly, the girl heard a faint clicking sound coming from the next room. At first, she was scared that it was the attacker, but then the sounds were repeated next to her, and flashes appeared in her half-asleep state. Lacey realized it looked like a photo shoot. She confirmed it when she opened her eyes and saw someone taking her picture. Fortunately, it was not the criminal. It was a policeman who had arrived at the office to check on Lacey. Lacey remembered how the ambulance had arrived, how the policeman freed her. She was losing and regaining consciousness on the way to the intensive care unit of the nearest children's hospital. All this time, the doctors talked to her to keep her conscious. At each moment of clarity, Lacey tried to find out what had happened to her mother, but she never received an answer to any of her questions. Even now, while talking to the police, she still did not know that Mary was dead. After the police visit to the hospital, her father, brother, and sister came into the ward. They brought balloons and soft toys. Lacey still believed that her mother, like her, was in the hospital and had probably also suffered at the hands of the attacker but was still alive. The whole day of June 7th, Lacey's relatives spent with she, but they never answered any of her questions about Mary. She saw how, with each passing moment, her father's eyes filled with tears. Doubt began to creep in, but at that time, Lacey was still too weak and simply pushed away the bad thoughts. In the evening, James gathered his strength, went up to his daughter, knelt down, and hugged her. In a trembling voice, he told her that Mary was now in heaven with her great-grandmother. The detective leading the investigation could not afford to be sentimental, as the criminal responsible for the attack was still on the loose and might strike again. The local residents were in danger, and the bloodthirsty killer had to be stopped urgently. When Lacey found out about this, she realized with horror that she was the only chance for the police to catch the criminal. She also understood that she was in great danger and that the attacker might return to eliminate her as an unwanted witness. In the office where he committed the murder and attempted murder, the stranger left no traces. He managed to avoid leaving evidence by using latex gloves, which Lacey reported. However, he left biological fluids after abusing Mary, but their examination would take time, and the research capabilities of that era were much more modest. Therefore, the results only allowed the police to limit the circle of suspects, which at that point was not substantial. The criminal was likely an experienced killer. He knew how to avoid being caught, acted covertly, and used gloves. However, the police still had the main source of information, Lacey. She remembered the attacker perfectly and provided a very detailed description, including the smallest details of his clothing, appearance. Having learned that this man had taken her mother away from her, she was determined to bring him to justice. Describing the face of the criminal, Lacey suddenly recalled one important detail. Before he struck her on the head, while he had tied her hands with metal wire, she noticed a teardrop tattoo on his face, as well as a tattoo on his arm. This detail allowed the detectives to match these distinctive features with registered criminals. Detectives quickly identified a 31-year-old man named Jack Jones, who had the tattoos described by Lacey. Jack was well known to the local police for multiple robbery charges, but investigators did not suspect that he was responsible for much more serious crimes. The police quickly discovered Jack Jones's last known residence and went to apprehend him, expecting that he might already be on the run. To their surprise, Jack personally opened the door, did not seem alarmed at all. He was immediately brought to the station for questioning. While being taken to the department, detectives contemplated what tactics to employ to get the criminal to talk. To their surprise, no tricks were needed. As soon as Jack was asked about Mary and Lacey, he calmly began to recount what had happened. He stated that he had seen Mary standing in her office early that same day while he was driving past. As soon as it happened, he decided that he wanted to kill her because he found her incredibly beautiful. He returned later, knowing that the office closed around 4 p.m., when there should have been no one there. However, he saw a girl there but did not retreat. He tied up Lacey in the room because he was not interested in her. His goal from the very beginning was Mary. He bound her hands behind her back, placed her on the floor, abused her, and then cut a cord from the kettle, wrapped it around her neck, and began to strangle her. According to Jack Jones, this murder was an act of revenge for the abuse of his wife, as her attacker remained unpunished. The investigation revealed that Jack's wife did report the crime to the police, but later she retracted her statement against the abuser, leading to his release. Jack insisted that his wife was indeed abused, but why Mary had to pay for it remained a mystery. On the evening of June 7, 1995, Jack Jones was arrested for the abuse and murder of Mary. He was also charged with the attempted murder of Lacey. When the Phillips family was informed, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, as no one could be sure that the killer wouldn't come back to eliminate the only witness. However, their fight was just beginning, as Jack still had to be brought to justice in court. Thanks to his confession, there should not be any problems. Lacey did not want to attend the hearings to avoid further trauma, but the existing evidence against him was enough to send him to prison. The trial began in April of 1996. By that time, law enforcement officials had carefully reviewed all the evidence against Jack. It was decided to show in court a recording of Lacey's account, made on a dictaphone while she was recovering from her injuries in the hospital. She quickly recovered physically, but psychologically she was broken. However, even in such a state, she wanted justice. The defense attorney tried to refute her statement, but the jury did not believe him. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that he was not himself during the attack on the mother and daughter because he was treating his bipolar disorder with illegal drugs. His arguments about a difficult childhood were also unconvincing. Ultimately, the jury found Jack Jones guilty on all counts. For the murder of Mary Phillips, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For the brutal beating of Lacey, he received a life sentence along with an additional 30 years and a fine of $15,000 for the attempted murder of Lacey. But this was not the end of Jack's criminal story. While on death row, he confessed to another murder, that of 32-year-old Lori Barrett. This incident occurred during her 5-day vacation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where she planned to visit friends. Because she arrived late, she didn't want to bother her friend's family and decided to stay at a hotel instead. That evening, Barrett went to a local bar to relax after her trip. There, she met a young man with several tattoos. According to several witnesses who spoke to the police, Barrett was seen drinking with the stranger until about 2 a.m. in the hotel patio. After that, they went up in the elevator together, presumably to her room. The next day, she failed to show up for a planned barbecue with her friend. Later, a cleaning lady went to her room and found her body, which had been abused and strangled. Jack Jones confessed to this murder in 2005, claiming that he liked Barrett right away, and they spent the whole evening together before going up to her room. However, the details of what happened next and the reason for the attack remain unknown, as Jack refused to disclose them. For the trial related to this case, he was extradited to Florida and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after which he was returned to Arkansas to await execution. Interestingly, Jack Jones could have been caught and convicted of this crime while it was still being committed. A composite sketch was created based on witness statements and footage from the hotel's security cameras. His sister identified him after seeing the sketch in a newspaper and showed it to their father, who insisted that she never talk about the event or show Jack's image to anyone else. She complied, remaining silent. Jack's father then put him on a bus and sent him to Arkansas to prevent anyone from recognizing him based on the composite sketch. Unfortunately, it cost Mary Phillips her life. When Jack's family was questioned about the story, they admitted that they knew their son had met with Barrett before the attack but did not believe that Jack could be involved in such a brutal crime. Consequently, the father decided not to contact the police. They described Jack as a very complex person who grew increasingly gloomy and cruel with age, taking out his anger not only on his siblings but also on his parents. However, they justified his behavior until the last moment, believing he could be loving and gentle. They did not think he was capable of murder. On April 24, 2017, 52-year-old Jack Jones was executed for the murder of Mary Phillips at the Cummins unit, along with abuser-murderer Marcel Williams, marking the first double execution in the country in 17 years. Jones and Williams were 2 of 4 inmates executed in Arkansas in April 2017, the other 2 being convicted murderers Liddell Lee and Kenneth Williams. Jones's last meal consisted of fried chicken, fries with tartar sauce, beef jerky, 3 candy bars, a chocolate milkshake, and juice. Lacey, now grown, was present at the execution. When Jack was given his last words, he turned to the victim's daughter, tenderly called her by name, and claimed that he had perceived her as his daughter all his life. Naturally, this only caused her disgust and anger. After the execution, it was revealed that Jack Jones was involved in another murder. Just before his execution, he gave his sister a letter he had written in 2006, with instructions to open it a year after his execution. She respected his request. When she finally opened the letter from her brother, she read a terrible confession. On May 2, 1983, 20-year-old Regina Harrison left her house in the evening to ride her bike. At that time, 19-year-old Jack Jones was riding his bike towards the beach. He meets Regina, who catches his eye and secretly follows her to a deserted street where he attacks, abuses, and kills her. They began to search for her that same evening after Regina did not return home at the appointed time. The next day, her body was found in a nearby park with signs of abuse and strangulation, which became the cause of death. During the investigation of this crime, detectives found a witness who identified the criminal as Ronald Stewart, who was passing by the park at the approximate time of the murder. In January of 1985, Ronald pleaded guilty and was then sentenced to 50 years in prison. He died behind bars of cancer in 2008. It later turned out that the only reason an innocent man took the blame was that Ronald Stewart had already committed a series of abuses of other girls. He had been convicted of those crimes and was now afraid of the death penalty, so he made a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Ronald never denied his guilt during his lifetime, but DNA testing later showed that he was not guilty of Regina's murder. After Jack Jones' sister, Lynn, went to the police and handed over the letter confessing to the murder, DNA testing was conducted, and in February 2019, his words were officially confirmed: Jack was behind Regina's murder. Before the execution, he lost one of his legs due to diabetes. He stated that he was ready to die, and it remains unknown why he confessed to the murders of Mary and Barrett but did not do the same regarding Regina Harrison until he only mentioned it in a letter to his sister. After the execution, it became official that Jack had killed at least 3 young women. Law enforcement officials now believe that he could have been involved in more brutal crimes. Mary's widower, after Jack's death, spoke out against people who expressed support for the criminal. There were supporters of the killer who believed that he deserved a lighter sentence and demanded that the execution be cancelled. However, James said that he did not believe they would have maintained such a loyal attitude towards the criminal if he had killed their loved ones. Lacey, after talking to journalists, said that she could finally move on with her life. Justice had finally prevailed, and this dangerous criminal would no longer be able to harm anyone. However, even despite the execution, she believed that she would never be able to completely free herself from the consequences of the horror she had endured. Bree Kristen Kuhn was born in May 1987 in the United States and grew up with her parents and her older brother, Eric. The family lived in Pennsylvania until her parents divorced. Following the divorce, Bree and Eric moved to Texas with their mother, whose name has not been disclosed. When Eric entered 9th grade, Bree left Texas to live with their father in New York. At that time, their father was in a new relationship with a woman named Karen. Though Bree and her brother Eric lived apart, they remained close, staying in touch on important occasions. However, their relationship with their mother became strained over time. According to Eric, Their mother was physically abusive, and Bree would often defend him. She took on the role of a protector, enduring the abuse herself to keep her brother safe. These traumatic experiences profoundly affected Bree, leading her to struggle with depression and anxiety throughout her adolescence. By the age of 13, she had attempted to end her life. In the face of adversity, Bree focused on her education, attending 2 community colleges. While still young, she enlisted in the U.S. Navy, where she served for 17 years at various naval stations across the country. In 2009, she welcomed her first child, a daughter named Kay, with her then-partner, James. Although their relationship ended, Bree retained custody of Kay, while James was granted weekend visitation rights. She later began a relationship with Colin Turner, a fellow service member in the military. Colin James Turner, born on December 28, 1987, was raised in a close-knit, religious family alongside his parents, Tierva Donald Turner, and his sisters, Nicole and Rebecca. Known for his warmth and strong family values, Colin served in the Marine Corps with a specialization in explosive ordnance disposal. He married Casey Gatzman in 2009, and they had a son that same year. After the separation, custody of the children went to Casey, but Colin remained actively involved in his son's care and life. On May 29, 2016, Colin married Bree, and together they started a family with Bree's daughter, Kay. Colin embraced the role of Kay's father, treating her as his own, which deeply endeared her to his family. In April 2017, Bree and Colin welcomed their son, John Patrick, followed by their daughter, Lonnie, in August 2018. After 14 years of service, Colin retired from the Marines and began studying electrical engineering at Arizona State University. He also managed to balance his studies with his responsibilities as a parent, such as helping Kay with distance learning. By this time, the family had settled in Gulf Breeze, Florida, a community recognized for its safety and family-friendly environment. Despite outward appearances of stability, underlying issues were present in Bree and Colin's relationship. She confided to her brother, Eric, that her relationship with Colin was strained. When Eric visited to help mediate, Colin reportedly joked, both privately and in front of Bree, that they got along because they were both narcissistic psychopaths. Eric also noticed Bree felt burdened as the family's sole financial provider, while Colin focused on his studies and childcare. Although Eric encouraged Bree to leave the relationship, she hesitated. Her concerns include that Colin could use her mental health history and his family's finances to gain a legal advantage in a custody battle. In April 2021, she attempted to end her life by overdosing on pills and alcohol while speaking on the phone with Eric. Panicked, Eric contacted Colin, who was at home with Bree but reportedly did not help her. He ultimately called emergency services, and she was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility for 10 days. A month later, she returned to the facility for another week. During her recovery, Bree attributed much of her emotional distress to job-related stress and accused Colin of interfering with her work, which she said exacerbated her difficulties. However, she never publicly accused him of psychological, physical, or emotional abuse. After her hospitalization, she joined an intensive outpatient program and resumed her career at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. In her role as an assistant to the command chief, Bree was able to continue her treatment while serving under limited-duty sailor status. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Bree began seeking legal assistance. On Wednesday, September 8, 2021, she reached out to a group of mothers on a messaging app, asking for recommendations for a lawyer. She mentioned that the situation could escalate, as it involved disputes over children and property. At 12:53 p.m. that same day, Bree called 911 to report a domestic dispute with her husband, Colin, and requested police assistance at their home. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived at the scene. Colin, her husband, was calmly sitting in a beach chair at the end of the driveway. He informed the officers that Bree had a shotgun, a pistol in the bedroom, and admitted that he also had a firearm in his truck. Colin emphasized that Bree was the one who had called the police. When the officers asked about her whereabouts, he led one of them to the home's entrance and pointed toward the kitchen. As the officer entered, Bree's young son approached, curiously asking about the officer's equipment. Shortly afterward, Bree appeared, looking visibly frustrated. The police officer explained that they could not intervene immediately unless there were obvious injuries or specific evidence of violence. Bree responded bitterly, sarcastically stating that she would make things clearer next time. The officer attempted to de-escalate the situation, explaining that without a court order or restraining order, they could not prevent Colin from seeing or taking the children, especially since 2 of them were biologically his. When asked if she wanted to file a formal complaint, she declined, saying she just wanted to leave the house with her children. The officer informed her that he would speak to Colin while she gathered her belongings. While the officers were speaking with Colin, Bree began transferring items from Colin's truck to hers. Noticing this, Colin firmly stated that he would not allow her to take the children. He argued that he was their primary caregiver and claimed that he intended to take them to his parents' home in Georgia for a few days to let tensions cool down. He also denied having any intention of keeping the children away from Bree. One of the officers advised Colin that, as long as no violence was involved, parenting disputes were not matters for police intervention. When asked if he wanted to file a formal report, he agreed. The officers retrieved paperwork from their patrol vehicle and provided forms to both parties. When Bree saw her form, she asked what she should do if her husband hit her after they left. The officer advised her to use her phone's camera to document any evidence. The officers then departed. A few hours later, around 5 p.m., there was another 911 call from their home, this time from Colin. When the police arrived again, they found Colin outside, holding the youngest child. He told the officers that Bree was refusing to let him back into the house. She then went outside and tried to take the child from his arms. The officers intervened and asked Bree to go back inside to allow for a calm discussion. After confirming that Colin lived in and co-owned the house, an officer informed him that he had the legal right to enter the property, though they discouraged him from using force. The officer emphasized that Colin's access to the home was a lawful right. Concerned about another confrontation, he requested that the officer accompany him inside. Colin explained that Bree had attempted to take the child into the house, but the child had started screaming, refusing to go in without him. When the officer asked if any physical conflict had occurred, Colin said no but mentioned that the situation was part of a long-standing dispute that had lasted for years. Bree, on the other hand, told the officers that they were discussing divorce and claimed Colin intended to take the children to Georgia. She further accused him of being physically aggressive, adding that the earlier police visit had failed to protect her. She also alleged that Colin had contacted her superiors at work and possibly made claims of emotional abuse. The officer reiterated to Bree that she could not legally prevent Colin from entering his own home. He suggested they work out a temporary arrangement, such as staying in separate bedrooms and minimizing contact, for the well-being of their children. However, Bree refused, expressing concern that allowing Colin inside could lead to more violence. She again brought up her previous allegations of abuse and expressed fear of being harmed. The officer advised her to document any future incidents, but it was clear Bree was seeking more than just advice. She wanted protection that the current system was not equipped to provide. When the officer suggested that everyone enter the house together, Bree refused. The officer then turned to Colin, who calmly provided the children's information. During the exchange, he mentioned Bree's mental health issues. Police confirmed this and said that he had previously intervened in an incident at their home in March, when Bree attempted to harm herself. Police reminded Colin of the same advice they had previously given him, to remain separated within the home for the safety of everyone involved. He also pointed out that standing outside in the intense heat with a small child amidst biting mosquitoes was unsustainable. Before heading inside again, Colin asked the officer to retrieve his wallet, which Bree had allegedly taken from his vehicle. At the door, Bree met the officer. When asked about the wallet, she denied having it and claimed she had only taken Colin's credit card. The officer reminded her that a wallet is personal property, not something to be shared in marriage, and instructed her to return it if she had taken it. In a calm but firm tone, the officer told Bree she had to allow Colin and their daughter back into the house. Bree agreed, but only on the condition that Colin would not harass her or the children. The officer reassured her that if anything happened, she could call them again. As the officer prepared to leave, he returned to inform Colin that Bree claimed she did not know where the wallet was. Colin just smiled and implied that he would let the matter slide. But in reality, nothing was resolved satisfactorily. Less than 2 hours later, at exactly 6:22 p.m., a third and final 911 call came from their residence. Colin James Turner, just 33 years old, had been fatally shot. The final fatal gunshot rang out while the 911 operator was still on the line. On the porch, officers found Bree, then 34, sitting calmly. As they approached, she spontaneously confessed that she had shot her husband. She was taken into custody without resistance. When asked about the children, she said she had taken them to a neighbor who lived a few houses down. Paramedics checked her over while officers ensured that she was physically stable. When asked if she could breathe properly or needed medical care, she didn't respond, so emergency personnel were instructed to evaluate her. Bree was brought to the police station for questioning. The interrogation was slow, interrupted by long silences and frequent bouts of crying. During the interview, Bree opened up about the state of her marital relationship. She said Colin was the primary caregiver for their children and admitted that she believed she had little chance of winning custody due to her history of mental health struggles. She revealed that Colin had threatened to take the children to Georgia and had physically assaulted her. He had also warned that if she reported him, no one would believe her because of her mental health issues, calling her crazy. Bree confessed that she had removed the batteries from the garage door opener to stop Colin from leaving with the children. She claimed that Colin only pretended to care about her mental health as a way to manipulate her, especially after she decided to file for divorce. She mentioned that she had a legal appointment scheduled for the next day. She also mentioned that she had an appointment with a lawyer scheduled for the next day. When asked what had happened just before the attack, Bree said her memory after the second police visit was hazy. She recalled Colin attempting to enter the house through the garage but failing because the way was blocked. However, she said he then used a side door to enter the house. She claimed she tried to stop him, but her next clear memory was knocking on a neighbor's door. She remembered leaving her children there to ensure their safety before returning home to help her husband. Investigators pressed her for a more comprehensive account, but she could only provide scattered details. She said she returned to the garage and saw blood everywhere. Throughout the questioning, Bree repeatedly asked to call her father. Eventually, she was allowed to make the call, which lasted 18 minutes and consisted mostly of sobbing. Her father tried to comfort her, suggesting she would likely spend the night in jail and urging her to seek help if she felt like harming herself again. He reassured her that things could improve and told her to stay strong and look for hope. Toward the end of the call, Bree asked if her father could take custody of her two youngest children. He didn't give a definitive answer, suggesting instead that they would need to discuss it with Colin's mother. He also advised her to cooperate with a public defender if necessary until a more suitable legal option became available. At the end of the call, Bree painfully confesses, she doesn't know what's worse, knowing that Colin is dead or realizing that she was the one who killed him. A month later, in early October 2021, Bree was indicted by a Santa Rosa County grand jury for first-degree premeditated murder in connection to the death of her husband, Colin. Prosecutors had not yet decided whether to seek life imprisonment or the death penalty. On October 16, Colin's family and friends gathered for a military funeral to honor his 14 years of service in the U.S. Marine Corps. During the ceremony, the American flag symbolizing his service was presented to his eldest son, Brody Turner. The youngest children of his were adopted by his parents, who always strived to love and support him despite enduring an irreparable loss. After 3 years of delays, Bree's long-awaited trial began on Tuesday, September 24, 2024, at the Santa Rosa County Courthouse. Now 37 years old, Bree faced accusations of committing a premeditated and calculated act of murder. The prosecution carefully outlined the events of September 8, 2021, arguing that Bree intentionally killed her husband following a day of escalating conflict. Meanwhile, the defense presented a drastically different narrative, asserting that Bree was a victim of battered woman syndrome. They argued that she had endured years of psychological and emotional abuse from Colin, who had become increasingly unstable after suffering a traumatic brain injury during his military service. The defense maintained that he posed a significant threat to her and their children. Over 4 days, the court heard testimony from various witnesses. The jury and those in the courtroom reviewed full body cam footage from responding officers, which captured their interactions on the day of the incident. The recordings revealed Bree's sarcasm, Colin's calm demeanor, and the chilling 911 call during which gunshots were recorded in real time. Every officer involved testified, including one officer who described the crime scene in detail, recounting the sight of the garage, blood, Colin's body slumped in a chair, and a holstered weapon nearby. A crime scene analyst presented a series of photographs to help jurors visualize where Colin's body was found. Evidence collected included shell casings, bullet fragments, and Colin's phone, which was still connected to the 911 operator, lying beneath him. Prescriptions for Bree's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and mental health treatment were submitted as evidence, along with testimony from her supervisor, Craig Forum, from the Pensacola Naval Station. Craig explained that Bree had been placed on limited duty due to mental health issues. He said that on the day of the shooting, Bree did not show up for work, and Colin called him to inform him that Bree had cut off the family's financial access and damaged the electronics in the house. Colin also told Craig that she had missed therapy sessions and that he was considering moving the children to Georgia. Craig testified that Colin remained calm and spoke in a composed manner throughout the call. He also provided Colin with contact information for a family counselor. Soon after, he spoke to Bree, who accused her husband of lying and being unreasonable in taking the children away. On the trial's second day, forensic pathologist Dr. Diana Oleski was called to testify for the prosecution. Although she did not personally perform Colin's autopsy, she reviewed the results and formed her conclusion. The autopsy revealed that Colin had been shot 4 times, all from behind. The bullets entered between his shoulders and chest. One particularly devastating shot passed through his left shoulder, exited the side of his neck, and lodged in his right wrist. The injuries caused extensive trauma, including punctured lungs, fractured ribs, damage to cervical vertebrae, a ruptured spleen, spinal cord injuries, and damage to the pericardium, the heart's protective membrane. Diana concluded that Colin would have survived for only a few minutes following the pericardial injury. When the defense attorney asked if there was any evidence to indicate that Colin's arm was broken, since he had claimed during the 911 call that Bree had tried to break his arm, Diana responded that there were no signs of injuries consistent with that statement. Eric, Bree's brother, was the next to testify. He recounted a phone conversation with Bree months earlier, on the day she attempted to end her life. During that call, she told him she had taken pills mixed with alcohol. Eric stated that when he informed Colin of this, Colin showed no concern and took no action to help, prompting Eric to step in and call for assistance. Eric also mentioned that Bree had always feared losing her children, believing Colin's family's wealth and legal resources would work against her. On the day of the attack, Eric said Bree was especially anxious because she had an upcoming surgery and feared that Colin would use that time to take the children. He recalled speaking to Bree several times that day, noting her mood alternated between calm and distressed. During their final 45-minute call, Eric said he overheard Bree arguing with Colin, followed by shouting and the sound of objects being thrown. He claimed that Bree had then picked up a weapon. When asked how Eric knew this, he hesitated, saying he believed Bree had told him. Eric begged her to leave with the children, but she didn't listen. The call ended with Bree saying that she was not going to take the kids, followed by the sound of gunshots, crying children, and Bree repeatedly saying that she had killed him and that she needed to call the police. However, Eric's testimony was inconsistent under cross-examination. His account differed from his initial statements to detectives in Pennsylvania. He attributed these contradictions to the claim that his first interview had not been recorded, a claim the detective denied. With that, the prosecution rested its case. The defense initially planned to present Bree's defense through testimony from a mental health expert and Bree herself to explain battered woman syndrome. However, they unexpectedly changed strategy, opting not to present these testimonies and offering no public explanation for their decision. Instead, the defense called James, Bree's ex-husband and the father of her eldest daughter, Kay. James testified about the incident on the day of the shooting. He stated that he exchanged text messages with Colin and later received a phone call from Bree. During the call, Bree had told him that he needed to come get Kay and that she had just shot Colin. When he had asked why, she had responded that she didn't know. James immediately went to pick up his daughter. James also testified in court that he had always thought highly of Colin as a stepfather and that Kay had spoken positively about him. On the third day of the trial, proceedings were interrupted by a hurricane warning, delaying closing arguments until Friday, September 27th. During the prosecution's closing argument, they emphasized that Bree showed no visible injuries on the day of the shooting. They argued that Bree deliberately provoked Colin, secretly filmed the confrontation on her phone, and kept her brother on the line during the incident. They contended that her motive was not self-defense but a desire to assert control. The prosecution concluded that, being unable to provoke aggression from Colin, Bree attacked him 4 times in the back without realizing he was on a 911 call. The defense argued that Colin had been walking around the house with a firearm and suggested he hid the weapon in his truck before police arrived. They referenced Colin's 911 call, where he claimed Bree tried to break his arm, a claim contradicted by the autopsy. One of the defense attorneys mocked Colin's actions during the call, asserting that, as a Marine, he should have handled the situation differently, further implying that his response would have been ridiculed by others in his military unit. The defense ultimately claimed that Bree resorted to attacking Colin because law enforcement had repeatedly failed to protect her despite her pleas for help. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. During the sentencing hearing, the judge allowed Colin's parents to speak about the impact of the incident. Colin's mother expressed gratitude for having custody of her grandchildren and stated her intent to adopt them. She condemned Bree not only for taking her son's life but also for attempting to tarnish his reputation. Colin's father spoke of his sadness and disappointment in Bree's actions, sharing that the children were doing well in school and surrounded by love. The judge then sentenced Bree Kristen Kuhn to life in prison. Although the verdict has been announced, the case is not over yet. On October 3, 2024, Bree's legal team filed an appeal with the Florida Court of Appeals, challenging her conviction and requesting a new trial. Meanwhile, Bree was discharged from the U.S. Navy with a general discharge under honorable conditions after 17 years of service, thus avoiding further military disciplinary action.